Hey guys, tonight we walk barefoot. If you're feeling brave through one of the softest, most bureaucratic mysteries history ever wove, you're not just standing on an antique rug in this story. No, you're strolling across a velvet ledger, a massive spreadsheet made from wool, silk, and maybe a few crushed insects because, yes, that dye had to come from somewhere. Imagine this, you're inside an ancient Persian palace, cool stone beneath your feet, the air thick with incense and the faint rustle of papyrus scrolls. Only there are no scrolls in this room, just carpets. Rich, ornate, overwhelmingly intricate carpets sprawled wall to wall like a royal fever dream. But here's the part that probably ruins the romance, those beautiful swirls, floral flourishes, and hypnotic geometries. Not art. Not entirely. Anyway, some of them are, in fact, tax forms. Ancient Persian accountants weren't just good with numbers, they were very committed to weaving their ledgers directly into floor decor. And yes, you probably won't survive this if you're a CPA. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing the global bedtime roll in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly through a sunlit courtyard in Persepolis. The stones are warm, the shadows long, and somewhere nearby, a scribe is grumbling over a cracked tablet. But your eyes are on the ground, not the sky, not the monuments or lions or bronze urns. You're watching your feet move across a carpet that probably predates your own country. It's not like the ones you've seen in modern museums. This rug is colossal, sun-bleached, and slightly coarse underfoot. Some of the colors have faded, but the geometry's still sharp. So sharp, in fact, that you start wondering, are those diamonds actually letters? Are those vines actually numerals? You blink. There's a pattern emerging, looped medallions, swirling vines, and tiny shapes that look like columns stacked neatly in rows. You realize absurdly that this isn't just decoration, it's information. Welcome to the Achaemenid Empire, where carpets were less about comfort and more about control. At its height, the Persian Empire stretched from modern-day Turkey to Pakistan. That's 5.5 million square kilometers of dusty, rebellious, tax-paying terrain, or at least tax-expected terrain. And when you rule that much land, what do? You document. You count. You track who owes what, when, and how much goat fat they paid you in last spring. But this is the 5th century BCE. There are no Excel spreadsheets, no typewriters, not even bound books. So how do you record complex tax data across a sprawling, multilingual empire? Well, if you're Persia, you weave it, and you do it brilliantly. Let's say you're a local governor, a satrap, in the lush province of Media. You've just finished collecting annual tribute from dozens of villages. Barley sacks, silver coins, dyed fabric, goats, a suspiciously light cart of frankincense, you name it. You could chisel it all into a clay tablet. Sure, but tablets break. Scrolls get wet. Oral reports? Please. Instead, you call in your most trusted weaving guild. You tell them this year, I want a long runner carpet, border in red, with 7 lotus medallions, one for each district. In the center, a repeating pattern of stylized ibex horns and grape clusters. You know what that means? They know what that means. The imperial auditors will know too. This rug will be delivered to Persepolis. The king's vizier will unroll it with quiet ceremony, inspect its motifs like he's reading poetry, and just like that, he'll know how much tribute came in, which districts underpaid, and whether the satrap needs a gentle reminder or an aggressive envoy. Sleepy yet? Because here's where it gets charmingly annoying. Not all of this is confirmed. Historians still argue whether these carpets were formal bureaucratic instruments or just highly coded tradition. But the growing scholarly consensus, some of them, at least, were very much used as textile tax documents. We do know that textiles in ancient Persia had political weight. In fact, Persian kings often received textiles as tribute rather than currency. Fabric was wealth. Carpets, especially wool blends dyed with rare pigments, were literal capital. And the weaving guilds. Oh, they weren't just craftswomen, yes. Mostly women. They were state contractors. Certain families, generations deep in not counting precision, worked exclusively for the empire. They followed strict motif rules. Color codes, border measurements, one wrong knot, and your whole report might say we paid when you meant we lied. The designs themselves purposefully symbolic. A lion might represent the king's strength. A palm tree, tribute from the fertile lands near Babylon. A half diamond could mean half paid. A broken pattern near the fringe, possibly a warning that a village refused to comply. Or maybe someone just sneezed while weaving. Let's zoom in. You squat beside one such carpet, now your fingertips brushing the weft. The knots are tight. You count 8 per centimeter. The border has zigzag triangles alternating with stylized birds. Inside the main field, rows of repeating cypress trees, each slightly different. One tree has 4 leaves, another has 3, the third has none. The difference? A hidden code. Some historians believe these visual irregularities indicated resource tallies. Each leaf, takiyama, asserts a unit of barley, or livestock, or even labor. A weaver might embed these codes to represent which village contributed how much. And if that sounds like fantasy, consider the Inca. They used quipu knotted strings for exactly this. The concept of textile record-keeping isn't unique. Persia may just have had the fluffiest version. Then again, the exact meaning of some rug motifs lost? Untranslatable, like the empire's dreams? You walk onward, brushing dust from another rug rolled up in a palace corner. This one is darker, dyed with lapis and crushed beetle shells. The smell is ancient, almost sweet. You see a circular emblem near the center. A stylized mountain with 3 streams flowing out. According to some fringe theorists, this may represent a tax exemption. Why? Because this particular symbol only shows up in carpets recovered from noble houses. The idea is if your region produced clean water, a rare luxury, maybe your taxes were reduced. Or maybe it's just a mountain. That's the trick with historical rugs. Historians still debate whether we're seeing taxes or just taste. Still, it's comforting to imagine ancient accountants nodding solemnly over an embroidered corner, mumbling, yes. The village of Duru paid 3 sheep, a calf, and 2 jars of honey, all from a carpet. Of course, mistakes happened. Sometimes colors bled, threads snapped. A poorly stored rug might distort its own data. It's like accidentally sending your tax return through a car wash. Not ideal. But here's a fringe theory pun absolutely intended. What if some of those mistakes were intentional? What if clever weavers inserted small errors to fudge the numbers just enough to knock a few coins off the tribute? Without raising suspicion. You can almost picture it, a young weaver glancing both ways before slipping in an extra loop. A nervous laugh. A tax official too polite or too clueless to notice. Welcome to the soft rebellion. By now, you're probably thinking, was everything taxed in ancient Persia? Short answer, if it could be counted. It was taxed. Barley, olives, horses, manpower, even dye. Especially dye. You walk past a hanging rug crimson with purple accents. The dye's alone prettier than gold. Some pigments came from India, others from sea snails or roots that grew only in one rocky hillside in what is now northern Iran. Every dye was documented. The source mattered. The color told a story. And Persian rugs, they told many. You sit down now, cross-legged, on a rug so old the threads whisper. Your fingers trace a faded motif shaped like a bird flying backward. Odd, possibly symbolic. Possibly an accident. Possibly a metaphor for this entire journey through ancient bureaucracy. The bird, after all, may be saying the past is always watching. Or maybe it just looks cool. Either way, you yawn. The room darkens. The ceiling blurs. The edges of the rug seem to ripple like water. And the last thing you hear, before you begin to drift, is the quiet shuffle of a taxman rolling up another carpet, nodding and saying, "This'll go nicely in the archive." You blink your eyes open, though you never quite close them. You're still on the same cool palace floor, the same fading sun filtering through carved stone windows, the same heavy scent of ancient wool and incense. But now the room feels different. It's busier. Faint footsteps echo against the tiles, sandals slapping softly, and somewhere in the distance, you catch the faint clatter of ceramic pots and murmured voices speaking in old Persian soft, rhythmic, almost musical. You're not alone anymore. You've wandered backward into the heart of the empire, into the thick of it, where paperwork didn't mean paper, and everything, from feathers to footstools, might have been taxable. You stand slowly, brushing off imagined lint, and drift into the corridor where the real fiscal magic happened. Not in treasury vaults or dusty scroll rooms, but in humble village-weaving houses and sprawling market pavilions. Because this is where it all started: the tribute system, the empire of threads, and the absolutely mind-boggling idea that you could manage millions of subjects across thousands of kilometers with a bit of dyed yarn and a solid sense of geometry. The Achaemenid tribute system was genius bureaucracy with embroidery. Each province, or satrapy, was responsible for paying taxes to the central government. But here's the cozy twist: instead of paying in coins, which weren't always available, they often paid in goods. Lots of goods. You name it: wheat, camels, sheep, dye, wine, carpets, sandals, ivory, monkeys. Yes, monkeys. And all of it had to be accounted for. Not once, not vaguely. Precisely, Monuxoid. With imperial receipts. Now, clay tablets were definitely used, but they weren't practical everywhere. Papyrus too fragile. And besides, if you were in a rural village with a strong textile tradition and no access to trained scribes, what did you have? You had looms, wool, hands, and centuries of inherited symbolic code. So imagine you're a satrap now. Not a fancy one in the capital. You're in the sticks. Somewhere in Carmania, where the roads are dust and the goats are louder than your scribes. You need a record of how much tribute your region is sending to the King of Kings this year. The obvious solution: you call your weavers. They already know the drill. Each household sends its quotas in livestock and grain. The guild tracks them using patterns flowers for wheat bushels, knots for sheep, stylized hoof prints for oxen, a spiral motif that might stand for fermented goods. Yes, you could absolutely pay your taxes in wine. History is wonderful sometimes. And over time, these motifs evolved into shorthand, a sort of textile glyph language. Historians still debate whether these motifs were standard across provinces, or if every region had its own dialect of design. One theory suggests there was a secret guild lexicon, a cross-empire pattern code, that only official weavers knew. Another theory: total chaos. Each satrapy invented its own system, and the imperial auditors had to learn them all, like a student flipping between 20 different math textbooks, each written in a different language and meter. Either way, the records were made. And rugs dense, portable, surprisingly fire-resistant became the medium of choice. You shuffle into another room now. This one is quieter, dustier. Rugs stacked in a massive heap against one wall, half covered in a silk tarp. Someone once tried to catalog them. There's a cracked tag near the top. A date? A year that predates the Gregorian calendar. You peel one back. It's huge, 3 meters by 4. Its edges still vibrant. And as you study the design, you realize it's not random. There's a central medallion. Around it, 12 diamonds each containing a symbol. A date palm, a lion's paw, a fish, a curved blade, a jar, a circle within a square. Each motif repeats in a specific rhythm. This isn't a rug, this is a chart. Scholars speculate that rugs like this weren't only records, they were summaries. The high-level executive overview carpets, the Empire's PowerPoint slides in wool form. A quick glance at the pattern told the central treasury. Here's what this province contributed. Here's the month. Here's how many units. Here's what's missing. The rest could be cross-referenced. And if there were disputes, more detailed rugs existed, possibly smaller, possibly color-coded. Because, of course, they were. You wander further, into the heart of the palace's tribute chamber. You pass two scribes arguing softly over a rolled carpet and a clay tablet. One gestures at a jagged border, perhaps it means unpaid debt. The other squints and mutters that it actually means surplus grain. This debate has likely lasted centuries. There are no written manuals. After all, the carpets were never footnoted. They relied on shared visual language, on memory, and on guild secrets passed down in whispered hallways behind the looms. And here's the thing, the looms were everywhere. Each satrapy had official guilds. Women, mostly highly skilled artisans, trained from childhood to read, interpret, and execute patterns with mathematical precision. It's believed that some of them were literate in multiple textile dialects. Their job wasn't just craft, it was administration. These weavers were living ledgers, and when tax season came, they didn't reach for a scroll. They reached for thread. You pass one now, just a ghost of memory. A young girl kneeling before her loom, eyes focused, hands moving with fluid grace. She's stitching a row of cypress trees, each one slightly tilted. That tilt, it means delayed shipment. She doesn't speak as she works. She doesn't need to. The carpet will say everything. And when she finishes, it will be folded, not rolled, because folding signifies urgency. The messenger will carry it with him to the capital. The king's vizier will read it with practiced eyes. The kingdom will continue, one stitch at a time. It's oddly peaceful, bureaucracy at its sleepiest. But sometimes it got spicy. There's one carpet, half wrapped in silk and stashed deep in the treasury archives, that seems to record a tax protest. No one's entirely sure. The motifs are aggressive, sharp angles, repeated serpents. One scholar insists the border pattern is a visual pun on corruption. Another thinks it's just a provincial rug designer having a dramatic week. Still, the idea is tantalizing. What if weaving was also a form of resistance? After all, who'd suspect the tribute rug of hiding messages? Who would imagine the empire's tax carpet was whispering subversion in lotus flowers? Even today, some motifs remain unreadable, just shape and silence. Perhaps codes lost to time. Or maybe they never meant anything. But isn't that what the best secrets want you to believe? As you step deeper into the royal chambers, a large loom stands in the center, now empty. Its wooden frame is cracked, but you can imagine the voices, the chatter, the shuffle of sandals and clack of combs. The Ministry of Weaving, yes. That existed sent orders each year to standardize tribute documentation. This year, they might decree, we will use spirals to denote dates and zigzags for grain. A sort of empire-wide textile memo. Except, like all bureaucracies, it probably never worked the same way twice. One document mentions a satrap who tried to switch from spiral motifs to stripes mid-year, confusing everyone, including himself. The imperial courier reportedly got lost trying to deliver the rug with 3 mountains and no rivers. That courier resigned, so you sit back now, on another ancient rug. You run your hand over the dense knots. They're not just decoration, they're testimony. Not just beauty, but bureaucracy, softly humming under your fingertips. You close your eyes. Somewhere. A satrap sighs. Somewhere. A weaver smiles slyly and adds a crooked loop that nobody notices. Somewhere. A king reads a rug and nods gravely, as if it's speaking to him alone. And maybe, in a way, it is. Because these aren't just carpets. They're conversations across time. Quiet, cozy, slightly dusty conversations. And you're finally listening. The soft threads beneath you whisper again as the scene begins to shift. Slowly, gently, your surroundings ripple like the warp and weft of a loom stretching under tension. Now you're not in the palace. You've been pulled outward, eastward, over hills and through wind, to a shaded village near the banks of the Halil River. The sun hangs low over a clay-roofed house. A breeze lifts dry leaves from a pomegranate tree, and the distant bleat of sheep blends with the rhythmic thump of a loom inside. You follow the sound, drawn by its meditative pull, wood tapping wood, a comb brushing down, a knot pulled tight. Inside, the space is cool, dim, and humming with focus. Three women sit cross-legged before a giant vertical loom. The youngest one, barely 13, twists red thread around her fingers, humming a tune so old it doesn't bother with lyrics. The older woman to her left taps the pattern chart, murmuring about cypress spacing, and the third, the matriarch, is staring down the pattern itself. She's not just weaving a carpet, she's updating a ledger. And here's the part that makes your eyelids a little heavier. This is how local governance ran in ancient Persia. Not with signatures, not with wax seals, but with these women, this loom, and a lot of very serious thread decisions. They're not weaving art. Not exactly. They're fulfilling a commission from the satrap, your new favorite word. That local governor has requested an annual textile report. And like every year, the report must reflect payments in kind. That means one section for grain output wheat and barley, separated by color. Another for livestock goats get diagonal checks. Cattle get alternating spirals. And a tricky corner for labor quotas. Those are the ones people like to fudge. You sit near the loom, close enough to smell wool and hear the soft sighs of concentration. The matriarch's hands move in deliberate patterns. The youngest girl ties the knots 7 per centimeter. Not too tight, or the thread snaps. Not too loose, or the symbol distorts. If she messes up, the meaning shifts. The king's vizier may think they paid 10 goats instead of 8. Imagine explaining that error to a royal tax inspector. You wonder, did they know how much power they had? These women, did they realize that their hands were creating the primary record of economic life in an empire? Or was it just another day of work, another rug on the pile? Historians are still trying to answer that. Some argue the weavers were purely functional craftspeople with strict pattern instructions. Others believe they were trusted community archivists, holding centuries of textile-based knowledge in their minds. The truth is probably both. In villages, the rug wasn't art, it was currency, record, even confession. One wild fringe theory suggests that weavers sometimes inserted family secrets into the design. Not for anyone else, just for them. A tiny bird pattern that meant child born early. A curled vine that signaled a land dispute. A knot skipped deliberately silent grief made permanent. There's no proof, of course, but you're allowed to believe it anyway. It makes the room a little softer. The women now begin the tribute band, a long horizontal section running through the center of the rug. This is where most of the symbolic accounting happens. You lean forward, intrigued. The red section means wheat. Every diamond, like 100 bushels. 6 diamonds, easy math. Then comes green. Barley. 4 triangles with curved edges. That's 400 units, possibly dried barley since they're curved. Not sharp. The next section is blue. Goats. This is where it gets tricky. Some knots are tighter, others looser. That's not an accident. It might be a local dialect of textile math. Tight knots meaning full-grown goats. Looser ones meaning kids. Or maybe the knots represent delivered versus expected numbers. Or even breed. You ask no one in particular. How do the king's officials keep track of this without charts? The matriarch glances up. She doesn't speak. She just smiles like she knows something you don't. Because here's a not-so-sleepy truth: the empire didn't standardize everything. There was no master index of rug codes, no universal textile dictionary. The knowledge was localized, contextual, oral. The vizier might recognize motifs from the region, but only because he memorized them. Each province developed its own design language. Each rug was like a dialect. The vizier's job was part aesthetics, part accounting, part puzzle solving. No pressure. You lie back now, letting the rhythm of the loom carry you. In, out, tap, not. Tap. The whole room seems to breathe. This wasn't a static system. The symbols evolved over time. A star pattern that meant debt cleared in one century might mean pending labor in the next. The empire's culture shifted. Rulers changed. Tribute priorities restructured. New motifs entered. Old ones retired. But the rugs stayed. They piled up in palaces, in tribute chambers, in storage basements that probably smelled like a barn full of cinnamon. Not all made it. Many decayed. Some were burned intentionally. Because let's face it, if you want to erase a tax record, you don't shred it. You toss it in a cooking fire. Wait 3 minutes, and then pretend you never wove anything at all. Other carpets, the fancier ones, were gifted. Because the king didn't just receive tribute, he redistributed it too. Rugs made for tax purposes were often regifted to noble families or foreign allies. Here, take this luxurious hand-woven invoice. It'll look great in your summer palace. It's possible, no. Likely that some royal gifts were just veiled receipts. Imagine being a visiting dignitary and realizing that the stunning Persian carpet in your honor is also a detailed report of sheep deliveries in Elam. You chuckle quietly. It's all so delightfully inefficient and brilliant. And then, suddenly, your thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of an imperial courier. He's not dramatic. No trumpet. No scroll. Just dusty boots and a leather pouch. He bows low to the matriarch and exchanges a few whispered words. She nods, points at the nearly finished rug. The courier will wait. The rug will be bound carefully folded, never rolled. Placed in a canvas wrapper, a wax seal will be pressed onto the string. He'll carry it on horseback back to the capital. If he's lucky, no storms. If he's unlucky, someone might try to steal the rug. Not because they want the data, but because the dyes are rare, the wool's soft, the craft exquisite. And once the carpet reaches Persepolis, it will enter the review process. That's a fancy way of saying a guy in a hat stares at it for several hours. The palace had staff for this. Historians believe that carpet readers were real Rolls officials whose job was to interpret regional rug motifs, look for inconsistencies, and make notations in other documents. If the patterns matched expectations, great. If not, well, someone would have to explain that spiral-turned square section in the lower right corner. But sometimes inconsistencies weren't mistakes. They were warnings. Take, for instance, the infamous carpet of Shiraz, allegedly delivered in the late 5th century BCE, though its existence remains hotly debated. It was said to be 6 meters wide, red and gold, with no repeating pattern. None. Every single motif was unique. No central medallion, no symmetry. That was unheard of. To imperial auditors, it was chaos. But according to one fringe theory, that was the point. The carpet was a protest, a visual refusal to conform, a way for the province of Shiraz to signal dissent without saying a word. What happened to the carpet? No one knows. Some say it was burned. Others say it was quietly accepted, and a formal envoy was sent to Shiraz 3 weeks later. You stretch out now, arms above your head, toes brushing the edge of a half-woven rug. The loom creaks gently in the wind. The scent of wool lingers like memory. And as your breath slows, you realize something the history here isn't in palaces. It's in the knots, in the hands that made them, in the 1,000 tiny choices made by women who probably never left their village but shaped an empire's records one thread at a time. Your eyelids grow heavy again. You imagine the matriarch pressing the final knot into place, the courier lifting the finished carpet onto his back, a kingdom measured not by gold or glory but by the quiet math of wool and time. You wake slowly not because of a noise but because of the silence. The kind of silence that only comes with heavy stone walls, ancient intentions, and thick carpets soaking up every sound like secrets. You're still in Persia. But now, you've arrived somewhere even stranger than a weaving house or a tribute tent. You're in the office of a satrap, one of the empire's provincial governors. The space is airy, the light filtered through intricate wooden screens, casting lattice-like shadows across the floor. But what grabs your eye immediately isn't the architecture, it's the floor itself. Rug, enormous, detailed, and suspiciously deliberate. There's a satrap hunched over a scroll to your left, arguing with a junior scribe, but his hand rests absently on a section of the carpet, almost like it's helping him think. You look closer. The motif beneath his fingers. Not abstract. It's a set of repeating almond-shaped leaves with jagged centers. You've seen those before. They're a code. Here, you learn something surprising. Not every tax-coded carpet was meant for the capital. Some were local use only, created as a visual log for provincial bookkeeping. These rugs were long, narrow, and often kept underfoot in satrapal offices. And unlike the fancier imperial rugs, these were updated regularly. That's right, some historians argue that certain carpets were partially rewoven each season. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? But you know how difficult it is to keep accurate ledgers without ink or stable storage. Reworking a portion of a rug, pulling out specific rows and reknotting them, might have been the most secure and weatherproof option available. Sure, it's fiddly, but this is Persia, and Persia didn't do anything halfway. And what about those rows of flowers that keep shifting slightly in shape across the rug? You guessed it. Seasonal updates. Some believe the petal count on each flower corresponded to the volume of grain storage every few months. A section would be quietly altered, one extra petal a bumper harvest, a missing leaf drought. So now, picture this scene, a room full of junior accountants pacing across a rug, shoes off, muttering to themselves as they trace symbols with their toes. They don't need scrolls. They're reading the floor. That's a whole new level of open-plan office. Of course, not every governor embraced this system. Some preferred traditional tablets. Others, especially those in the empire's artistic cities, took the carpet method to the extreme. Let's take you to Sardis. You drift through a doorway and find yourself in a hall lined with fabric, wall hangings, drapes, ceiling cloths every inch covered in woven patterns. This wasn't decor. This was paperwork. Here, satraps displayed their tribute records like tapestries, each section tied to a particular month or district. The trick: guests couldn't read it. Only the weavers, the governor, and his senior aides knew how to interpret the designs. It was confidentiality through beauty. Someone visiting from India might marvel at the lush borders and bird motifs, never realizing they were looking at a detailed log of livestock yields from 6 separate provinces. Why not write it down? Well, let's be honest. Scrolls tear, ink fades, rodents nibble, but a fine woolen weave, dyed with indigo and sealed with cedar oil, that lasts. And it blends in. Sometimes, when you want to keep secrets safe, you make them visible. So visible, in fact, that people stop asking questions. And in case you're wondering whether this whole carpet thing was really so widespread, consider this: during excavations in regions once part of the Achaemenid Empire, archaeologists found fragments of thick, high knot count textiles buried alongside administrative tools, weights, tallies, and seals. These fragments often contained repetitive, regimented motifs, some with unusual numerical consistencies. And yet, no direct written explanation of the motifs survives. You know what that means, right? Historians still argue whether these carpets were art or administration. That phrase again, because it's everywhere with this topic. The ambiguity is what makes it perfect for bedtime. It's tidy and tangled all at once, a puzzle made of thread. You drift now into another chamber, this one belonging to a satrap, known for his obsessive tendencies. Legend says he had an entire rug room, where each carpet represented a district under his control. When tribute arrived, he'd walk barefoot from rug to rug, consulting each one as if speaking with a council of woolly advisors. It may sound eccentric, but he kept excellent records. More than a few governors followed suit. Not because they had to, but because it worked. Rugs were visual, tactile, and most importantly, memorable. You don't forget that your eastern province is the one with the eight-leafed rosette and double-stripe border. It becomes a character in your mental map. Which brings us to a delightful little tangent. Some scholars believe that carpet patterns helped satraps remember details, not because they read them directly, but because each rug evoked a set of memorized facts, a kind of ancient mnemonic device. You'd look at the medallion, remember the story behind it, and suddenly recall, ah yes, this province delivered 400 jars of wine, 60 camels, and had that fight over irrigation. Your memory stitched to the motif, and this makes perfect sense in a culture with strong oral traditions. You wouldn't just memorize names or numbers, you'd attach them to shapes, textures, patterns, the way you might remember a song by its opening note or a face by its wrinkle pattern. So carpets weren't just records, they were memory maps. And what about error correction? Yes, that existed too. Some rugs included what might be the textile equivalent of footnotes, tiny fringe patterns or corner symbols indicating updates. You'll occasionally find a series of diamond motifs that abruptly switch shape in the final rows. One explanation: mid-year adjustment. Tribute shifted. The carpet had to keep up. No reprint, just reweave. There's even a theory somewhat outlandish, but fun, that certain rugs had erasures. A black thread stitched through a previous pattern meant to signal invalidation, as if saying, ignore this part, that goat never arrived. Was it efficient? Maybe not. But it was beautiful. And as you lie down again, cheek against the warmth of imagined wool, you realize the Persian tribute carpet was never just about information. It was about presence. You couldn't skim it like a scroll. You had to stand on it, sit with it, touch it, smell it. Notice how the threads curved, how the knots pressed into your skin. The carpet made you feel the data. No rush, no automation, just slow knowledge. And as the satrap in the corner finally signs his scroll, you watch him look down at the rug beneath his feet and trace one floral motif with the tip of his sandal. He nods once, smiles. He remembers something. So do you. Maybe you've been here before. Maybe that pattern in your grandmother's hallway meant more than anyone knew. You're still lying there, still half dreaming on a floor no one walks anymore. The carpet beneath you is impossibly old and yet completely present, each fiber a gentle whisper, each faded thread telling you something that paper never could. It doesn't demand your attention, it just waits. Patient, like all good secrets. But now you're wondering, how did these patterns mean anything? How could a swirl, a loop, a medallion stand for taxes? It's time to dig into the code. You sit up slowly. The sun has shifted again. A golden beam now stretches across the floor like a divine pointer highlighting a border. The rug's outermost band is made of tiny repeated figures, crescents, vines, and what looks like a very determined pigeon. You crawl toward it. Closer now. You see something that makes your eyebrows lift. The vines are not identical. One has a tiny loop near the root. Another doesn't. One curls counterclockwise. The next, clockwise. They alternate, then break rhythm. This is a code. You've stumbled into one of the cleverest, quietest systems in ancient Persian life. Symbolic pattern encoding. You know, like QR codes, but cozy. Let's start basic. Say you're a local official in Lydia. You want to represent a shipment of 10 sheep, 5 goats, and 1 very annoyed camel. But your village has no scribes, and your rug weavers don't read Old Persian. What do? You assign each animal a motif: sheep, double curve; goat, diamond with a dot; camel, ambouchure triangle with a squiggly base, obviously. Then you place those motifs in rows. The number of repetitions tells the quantity. It's so simple. It's brilliant. Now multiply that across an empire. Each region develops its own motif dialect. One uses leaf count, another uses petal layers, another knot tightness. Yes, seriously. One theory suggests tighter knots meant collected, while loose knots meant expected. And who created these codes? That's the best part. No one really knows. Historians argue whether there was a central authority, the fabled pattern master of Persepolis, or if these systems evolved organically, like regional accents. A few scholars believe guilds kept private glossaries, passed down from grandmother to daughter to niece. Secret codes that only their loom could speak fluently. You crawl farther down the rug, following a band of small connected lozenges, diamond shapes with dots at their centers. You count 7, then a break, then 5 more, then 3 spirals. This feels deliberate. Some experts say this configuration indicates time. 7 lozenges, 7 months, 5 fifth-month deliveries, 3 spirals, 3 delayed items. What were the items? You'd have to know the region's symbol set. Which brings you to a peculiar reality. Reading a Persian tax carpet was like reading an ancient newspaper in code. Without the key, you just see flowers. With it, it's a fiscal diary. And it didn't stop at shapes. Color mattered, too. You reach for a faded orange thread and give it a gentle tug. The dye has bled into the surrounding wool, creating a subtle halo. That orange wasn't chosen because it looked nice. It came from realgar, a mineral pigment often used to denote luxury goods. Why? Because realgar was toxic and expensive. You don't casually toss arsenic onto your living room rug unless you're making a serious bureaucratic point. Color coding was part of the visual shorthand. Yellow might mean grain. Blue, textiles. Red, livestock. Purple. Purple was sacred, reserved for tributes of rare luxury incense, ivory, even trained animals. You walk now through a room lined with hanging sample sections of tribute carpets from across the empire. Some preserved. Others just thread ghosts. One from Bactria, a gold thread motif shaped like a horned ram. Stands for mountain tribute, likely wool or horn-based goods. Another from area green and brown diamonds stitched tightly, possibly representing olive oil based on contemporary clay tally tablets found in the same region. And one carpet that simply shows a repeated open hand. No one's cracked that one. Some say it symbolizes labor. Others think it's a bribe. One delightfully grumpy professor argued it meant, "This is none of your business." You smile. History has attitude when you look close enough. You run your hand along another sample. This one's border is stitched in what looks like a spiral chain. The weft thread changes direction midway intentionally. The whole section bends inward like a parenthesis. Scholars call this the closing knot. A symbolic ending, the rug equivalent of, and that's that. Think of it like the period at the end of a fiscal year. And if that seems fussy, remember that to ancient Persia, rugs weren't just decoration. They were formal documents. Portable. Durable. Beautiful. You could store your taxes in a rug and still show it off during dinner. Which leads you to one of the quirkiest uses of this entire system. Audit rugs. Yes, audit rugs. Once a year, this small team from the Ministry of Weaving, yeah, that's a real phrase, would conduct inspections across the empire. They didn't carry tablets or scrolls. They brought sample rugs. Think of them as fuzzy spreadsheets. Each audit rug was coded with the year's official standards. The colors to use, the motifs, the rules. These rugs were shown to village guilds, who then matched their tribute rugs against the model. Too many spirals, you're inflating your wine numbers. Wrong colored thread, you claimed luxury goods when you didn't. Skipped border motif, you're hiding something. Imagine failing your audit because your floral motif had one too many petals. It's funny until you realize getting audited meant someone might burn your rug. Symbolically, that was serious. It meant the empire rejected your claim. And you'd have to pay again. Some ruins in central Persia contain scorched textile remains right next to clay tax tallies, suggesting at least a few rugs didn't pass inspection. And just like that, soft bureaucracy turned sharp. Now, as you walk through the archive hall, you pass one final carpet on display. It's enormous, twice your height, easily 20 feet long. Rich blues and faded maroons weave together in a symmetrical matrix of shapes. No two rows are alike. This, some say, is the master pattern. A rug made not to report a tribute, but to teach all the possible tribute codes. A living index. It's the Rosetta Stone of Persian textile taxation. Or at least it would be, if anyone could agree on what half the motifs meant. You look closer at one section, an alternating pattern of almond leaves and tulip heads. One scholar says it means salt. Another insists it's horses. A third suggests it means we gave up halfway and just made it pretty. That's the joy of this history. It's not about answers, it's about texture. And maybe that's the lesson you're here to learn. Not everything needs translation. Some systems exist just long enough to matter, and then melt into myth. Like these rugs. Like the dyes that faded. Like the codes now lost in museums or under your great-aunt's hallway runner. You sit again. Close your eyes. Let the symbols swirl beneath you. Almonds, spirals, vines, hands, stars. You may not read them, but you feel them. And maybe that's enough. The carpet beneath you seems to breathe as your fingers trail its seams. You stretch lazily, bones creaking like an old wooden loom, and shift your gaze upward to a tent flap stirring in the breeze. This isn't the palace anymore. You're somewhere out in the provinces now, far from the marbled halls and gold-dyed grandeur. You're in a tax inspector's tent. Yes, this was a real thing. And no, despite the boredom implied, these inspectors weren't all scrolls and sandals. Some were quite the travelers, trudging from town to oasis, collecting tribute data and comparing it, one rug at a time. Imagine an empire so thorough, so obsessively meticulous, that it sent men and occasionally women across deserts just to verify knot placement. Welcome to the ancient Persian carpet census. You glance around the tent. Bolts of cloth, crates of grain samples, satchels of scrolls, and of course a stack of rolled-up rugs, each labeled with wax tags and brushed with lavender to keep the moths away. The inspector, middle-aged, sun-darkened, sits on a folding stool. His sandals are off. His fingers press into the weave like he's feeling for a heartbeat. Too loose, he mutters. Either she was tired or hiding something. He's referring, of course, to the weaver. He can't prove fraud, but he's got a hunch. The tension's off. The symbol for livestock is blurred, and there's a suspicious patch of over-dyed thread possibly hiding a revision. This is where it gets fun. Because in Persia, carpets weren't just static. Some were designed to be updated, literally rewoven. You could unpick a section and redo it, especially in the census carpets. See, once a year, each district was required to submit updated population and resource data. But if you think they hauled giant ledgers across 800 miles of dirt track, think again. They did what anyone would do. They made a census rug. And if something changed, say 6 new families moved in, or the donkey population mysteriously tripled, you didn't rewrite the record. You altered the carpet, subtly, quietly. One knot at a time. You crawl over now to the inspector's left side. There's a narrow rug unrolled fully across a floor mat. The design is deceptively simple, a central tree motif with 37 leaves. Each leaf is different. This one, the inspector says, pointing at a serrated edge leaf, represents a household with military service obligations. His tone is matter-of-fact, like you should have known that already. Another leaf is oval and split in two, part farmer, part textile worker. Yet another is shaped like a looped arrow migration symbol. Someone left. The inspector marks a note on a wax tablet. Frowns. Cross-references with last year's census rug. Something doesn't add up. There are more households this year, but fewer livestock symbols. That shouldn't happen. Unless... He rolls the edge back. There it is. A corner with patchy repairs. 3 knots of faded blue, hidden under brighter wool. Someone tried to cover a shortage. A subtle edit. Too subtle. The inspector makes another note. He doesn't shout. He doesn't threaten. But the rug will go back to the capital with an asterisk. Suspected discrepancy. Reweave needed. There's a kind of bureaucratic poetry in it, isn't there? This wasn't just tax collection. It was surveillance via softness, control through threat. And yet, you're not mad at it. It's peaceful, honest, in a very tactile way. You walk outside now, past the tent, and into the open air. Villagers bustle around. A weaver wipes dye-stained hands on her apron and waves. A donkey tied to a tree chews on a rope that looks suspiciously more expensive than the saddle. You pass another census rug drying in the sun. This one's from a desert province. The main motif is circular, a solar disk surrounded by jagged lines. The jagged lines, a nearby child says solemnly, are goats. You laugh, and he's not wrong. This carpet is much more symbolic than literal. A few fringe scholars believe these regional styles were deliberately poetic. Not everyone believed data should be expressed in cold numbers. Some thought tribute should be beautiful, evocative. This rug, for instance, uses a rippling blue line to denote the seasonal river. The river appears only in the spring, and so does the tribute associated with irrigation. In the lower corner, a series of hash marks, or are they feathers? A whispering theory says they mark births. It's impossible to confirm, but you love the idea anyway. In the capital, this kind of rug would be decoded by a trained specialist, not a mathematician. A pattern reader, someone with years of experience in regional symbology and fabric behavior, they'd lay it out flat, light a brazier for atmosphere, maybe sip from a clay cup of cardamom tea, and then they'd read the rug like you're reading the story. One motif at a time. Rugs were also cross-referenced. That's right, you didn't just read one. You compared. Inspector scrolls showed 3 years of carpet data for each district. They'd lay the rugs out side by side and look for changes, a border motif missing this year, or a new color introduced without imperial authorization. That color change could mean a change in crop yield or a change in status. Dye was expensive. You don't suddenly go from walnut husk brown to indigo unless something changed economically. You return now to the inspector's tent, just in time to see him roll up the rug, binding it tightly in cloth. He stamps the cover with a metal seal, census-verified pending review. Some rugs would pass with ease. Others, not so much. You remember hearing of one village that submitted a census rug using completely new symbols. Beautiful, but unreadable. They claimed it was a new dialect. The capital disagreed. The rug was rejected. The village was taxed twice the next year. Innovation is tricky under empires. But here's the thing. The census rugs weren't just about tribute. They became records of identity, history, local pride. A rug from the mountains looked nothing like one from the coast. Some included floral motifs unique to a single valley. Others stitched the silhouette of their local ziggurat into the background. Just to say, yes, this is ours. And in a world before passports, documents, or IDs, these rugs were your signature, your proof of existence. When archaeologists uncover fragments of these census carpets, they don't just catalog them as textiles, they call them documents. And in their own silent way, they still speak. Even in museums behind glass. You stand now before one such fragment, displayed under soft lighting. The card says Origin Unknown Province, 5th century BCE. But you know better. That zigzag, the desert river, that dark loop, a household with 2 herders, that odd square within a square, a storage structure, grain bins, maybe, and the faded blue-winged shape, birth or loss, or both. You exhale. Suddenly, the rug doesn't feel old. It feels immediate. Alive? Because this wasn't just a method of data, it was a memory made tactile. It was how villages said, here we are. Here's what we have. Here's what we gave. And maybe, here's what we lost. Or gained. Or hoped for. The inspector exits the tent. He nods at you, tips his hat. Not because you were helpful, just because that's what he does after a job well done. He'll move on now. Another village, another rug. Another set of quiet knots that speak louder than any scroll ever could. And you stay a little longer. tracing those patterns with your eyes, letting your brain settle into the hypnotic rhythm of flowers, lines, and curls. Because while the empire tracked taxes, it also somehow kept a track of people. Through wool, through warmth, through the softest census ever made, the wind rustles dry grass outside the inspector's camp as you rise again. Barefoot on the soft imprint of history, a faint scent of cedar and wool lingers in your hair, now a trace of all the carpets you've laid across in this long, looping dream. You stretch your arms above your head, spine popping, and begin to walk. Tonight, you're going deeper. Not into the palace, not into the looms, but into the loopholes. Because every system, no matter how elegant, intricate, or wool-covered, eventually breeds clever minds who learn how to bend it. And yes, even in the finely knotted world of Persian carpet taxation, there were loopholes. Tiny ones. Woven ones. So now, let's talk about something rarely mentioned in polite weaving society. Intentional pattern manipulation. You slip through a low archway into a windowless room where the light flickers from oil lamps and the air is thick with smoke and whispers. You've arrived in the back chamber of a weaving guild, not the official kind, but the kind that operates in gray zones. Not quite criminal, not quite state-sanctioned, just creative. The weaver here is old. Her fingers are knotted like her thread. Her eyes sharp as obsidian. She doesn't speak much. She doesn't need to. You're not the first to visit her. In the corner, there's a rug stretched half-finished across a wide frame. It's beautiful, but something's off. The symmetry isn't symmetrical. A vine motif twists left when it should twist right. A flower petal count skips from 7 to 9, then drops back to 5. These aren't errors. They're evasions. You lean in and realize you've stumbled onto something whispered about in state archives. Carpet coding to underreport tax liability. Here's how it worked. Let's say a province owed 50 goats. The official pattern would include 10 rows of goat motifs, 5 in each, all perfectly aligned. But if you wanted to adjust that number quietly, maybe because the goats mysteriously got sick or wandered off, you might skip one motif. Just one. Or better yet, use an alternate motif. One that looked like a goat from a distance but meant something different to trained eyes. You twist the logic like a thread in your palm. These weren't mistakes. They were strategies. And they took collaboration. Because remember, these carpets were read by auditors. If you wanted to get away with a tax loophole, you needed one of 3 things. 1, a weaver who could disguise changes without detection. 2, a courier who wouldn't question a slightly too light carpet. 3, an auditor who was either incompetent or on your side. And yes, corruption existed. It wasn't rampant, but it didn't need to be. In a system where tribute was recorded in thousands of knots, all it took was one misplaced loop to turn 10 cows into 9, or 5 amphorae of wine into a very generous 4.5. And for that, you needed intention. Some carpets were stitched not just with thread, but with negotiation. Quiet deals, promises, bribes, hidden not under the table, but inside the weave. You glance again at the old weaver. She's adjusting a row of knotted symbols slightly tighter. Slightly darker, a signal. Historians suspect that tension manipulation was another form of loophole. Imagine this a border of tightly packed motifs that means goods delivered. But inside, the tension eases just a little, signaling that the inner figures are projections, not actual payments, a kind of woven IOU. Was it official? Absolutely not. Was it detectable? Only if you knew where to press. You kneel down and press your palm into the rug. There it is. The feel of it changes. That difference. It might have saved a village from famine-level taxation during a bad harvest year. So was it fraud or mercy? Historians still argue over that one. You rise again, stepping past bundles of raw wool and dye pots. The room smells of vinegar and sheep fat. Someone's been working with indigo. Its rich, earthy sharpness catches in your nose. Indigo was expensive, and that's why it became another loophole. Because certain motifs had to be indigo, others didn't. And if you were running low or trying to fake a shipment, you might simulate indigo using a cheaper substitute. Maybe a layered red and black blend. Maybe a plant-based dye enhanced with olum. It wasn't perfect, but under lamplight, convincing enough? There are records and palace documents noting unauthorized color deviations discovered during imperial audits. These weren't fashion critiques. They were fraud alerts. So, the punishment? Well, let's just say some rugs were never seen again. But not all deception was malicious. Sometimes errors were built in as protection. Picture this: a village had a decent harvest, but feared next year might be lean. So they underreported on purpose to keep their assessed quota low. A conservative lie. They called it self-tax insurance. So you stop near a tapestry hanging on the back wall. It's older, faded, but still clear enough to see there's a sequence of motifs near the base that almost resembles Morse code. Dots, dashes, a repeated lozenge. A scholar once suggested that this was a unpersonal annotation system, a weaver leaving notes for themselves, not the auditor. Things like delivered, but reluctantly, client paid in wool, not wine. Don't forget that this family lost their only ox. Like sticky notes, but 2,500 years ago, in wool, you grin. People are people, no matter the century. And yet, despite all these creative evasions and clever workarounds, the empire didn't collapse. The system held. Because for every loophole, there was loyalty. Most weavers did their work faithfully. Most guilds kept patterns sacred. Most auditors truly believed in the integrity of the tribute system. The deception. It was the margin, the exception, not the rule. And that, in a way, made it tolerable. Even expected. There's an old saying in bureaucratic circles, yes? Even in 5th century BCE, if no one tries to cheat the system isn't worth cheating. You exit the chamber now. Brushing past a wall of dye jars labeled in an extinct dialect, the sky outside is deepening rose into violet. Violet into indigo. Indigo into a velvet black. You lie down once more on a carpet spread out beneath the stars. Its pattern is clean, precise, honest. But you notice one thing. A single motif slightly misaligned. It could be an error, or maybe a whisper, or maybe just a bit of tired weaving late at night. You smile, because now you know even perfection has its loopholes. And in Persia, those imperfections were sometimes the most human thing of all. You're still lying there under the stars, the night pressing gently against your skin like warm wool, when something peculiar catches your eye. Not far from you. A torch flickers in the distance, casting strange, dancing shadows on a large carpet hung vertically like a banner. It's not for sale. It's not for sitting. It's not even entirely finished. You rise slowly, drawn toward it. This one's different. The knotwork is chaotic, tight, loose, tight again. The motifs don't repeat. Some of them, if you squint, look like angry faces. Or maybe birds. Or a skull. Welcome to the strange world of silent rebellion, where thread wasn't just used to pay taxes, but to push back against them. Tonight, we're talking about resistance, but the kind you can't hear shouted in the streets. The kind that gets woven into fringe corners and folded borders. The kind whispered from loom to loom, knot to knot. Because some cities didn't just pay their tribute, they protested it. And the best part, they did it in carpets. Let's drift to a small city near the Zagros Mountains. A place known not for its wealth, but for its weavers. For a time, the region was taxed heavily for its wool and water. The wells were deep. The sheep, plentiful. And the empire wanted its cut. But something happened. Somewhere in the 3rd year of Darius II's reign, the rugs started to change. They were still delivered, still sealed, still past inspection, technically, but when examined closely, something was off. Motifs that had once been regular sunbursts, trees. Goats now took on sharp angles. The trees bent sideways. The goats had teeth. The borders were jagged, like blades. And the dice, suddenly darker, stormier. The color of dusk, not day. Historians believe this was the beginning of what they now call the knotted resistance. No declarations, like no speeches, just thread. Symbolic, deniable, powerful. You kneel before one such piece now recreated based on fragments found in an old administrative center. The central field is a twisted spiral of dark blue and burnt red. The border crescent moons with their tips turned inward, enclosing the design. What does it mean? We don't know. But scholars speculate that it might represent suffocation, constriction, a silent outcry, a whisper of, "We're being squeezed." And here's where it gets fascinating. These weren't rugs made by revolutionaries hiding in caves. These were state-contracted weavers. The same women who had previously woven the king's lions and the satrap's olive branches. Same hands, new message. So why weren't they stopped? Because most of the auditors couldn't reach the subtext. To them, a bent tree was just a design choice. A goat with sharp horns. Perhaps a regional variant? Only a trained eye or someone from the same village might have caught the shift in tone. This wasn't sabotage, it was symbolic resistance. You shift your attention now to a different style of rebellion. The intentional irregularity. In some rugs, the code was broken on purpose. A motif would repeat 5 times, then skip. Or a stripe would shift hue mid-pattern. To an untrained observer, it looked like poor craftsmanship. But within the weaving guilds, these irregularities were intentional. Signals to insiders that something was wrong. One theory claims that entire messages were conveyed using why not counts. Here's how it might have worked. Let's say a standard motif is 12 knots wide, but suddenly, that motif is stitched 13 knots wide, then 11, then 13 again. The sequence 13 to 11 to 13. It might correspond to a hidden word, a name, a year, a warning, the kind of detail you'd miss unless you counted every loop. You glance up from the rug. The torch has burned lower now. The shadows stretch longer. You remember hearing of one particularly bold weaving group from Elam who created what looked like a regular tribute carpet, but embedded a rebellious message in the fringe tassels. Each tassel length was adjusted to correspond to a letter. When measured against a local encoding system, it spelled, "We remember who took our water." That's cold. Or maybe just deeply warm, in a slow-burning wool sort of way. You can't help but admire it. The beauty of this form of protest was its subtlety. It didn't seek to burn the empire down. It sought to preserve identity, to say we're still here. Even if we have to pay, even if you tax our goats and our grandmother's milk jugs, we are still weaving us into this. And the empire, sometimes it noticed, sometimes it didn't. There are records of a mid-level official in Susa flagging a rug as troubling in tone. That's the actual phrase? Troubling in tone. Imagine writing that about a floor covering. But in Persia, that could mean the rug had teeth. Literally. One such piece is now housed in a museum archive, rarely displayed. It shows a lion motif, repeated along the bottom edge. But unlike the official palace style, the lions here are emaciated, snarling. One even appears to be bleeding, with red thread dribbling from its mouth. Accident. Unlikely. Even today, textile historians disagree. Some call it art, others dissent. But here's what everyone agrees on. This wasn't done by accident. These weren't unskilled weavers. They were master artisans using their medium to speak without permission. You think now about all the rebellion that goes unheard because it doesn't raise its voice. Because it comes not in fire or speech, but in curves and loops and the careful choice to make a tulip slightly more closed than last year. And maybe that's the most enduring kind of rebellion. The kind that outlasts the kings. The kind you walk across for generations, never knowing you're standing on a whispered no. You lie back once more. The rug beneath you seems to hold you differently now. Not just as a guest, but as someone initiated. Someone who sees it. You trace your finger across a warped pattern, It feels like nothing, but it might mean everything. A woman wove this, maybe in silence, maybe humming to herself, maybe hiding a story in the space between the spirals. A name, a village, a truth. You'll never know it. But the rug does, and that's the point. You're still lying on that defiant rug, the stars dimming slowly above as the sky begins to soften from deep navy to dusty lavender. Somewhere in the empire, a rooster is clearing its throat. But you're not waking up yet, because now it's time to witness one of the most lavish, dramatic, and absurd moments in Persian bureaucratic history. The carpet for the king's auditor. Yes, you read that correctly. Imagine a carpet not rolled up, not folded in a sack, but carried on poles, like a royal litter. Not because it's fragile, but because it is the annual tax report, and it demands pageantry. Let's ease into the scene. You're now inside the marble courtyards of Persepolis again. The wind smells like roasted nuts and old incense. Columns stretch toward the sky like frozen smoke, and all eyes are on a procession moving through the outer gate. The king's auditor, a man whose title is longer than your grocery list, waits at the head of a raised dais. His robe is pressed, his beard is oiled. He is very serious about carpets. From the archway, a group of palace guards steps forward, followed by a satrap and two wool-bearers. Between them, a rolled object almost taller than you. This is not a regular rug. This is the fiscal textile, also known by those in the know as the floor of numbers. And it is ridiculous. You watch as the guards unroll it slowly, reverently, like it's revealing the secret to eternal life, or at least how many goats were collected in Cilicia. The rug unfurls with a satisfying whoosh, revealing a staggering spread of color and detail. It's 6 meters long, bordered in gold thread, with 12 symbolic panels running down its length, each representing a month of the year. In each panel, a different set of coded motifs: sunbursts for grain, triple knot rhombuses for livestock, watermark symbols woven with glossy silk for luxury items. At the very center of the rug sits an enormous 8-pointed star, inside of which is a concentric spiral pattern believed to represent total yield for the satrapy. You'd think this would be excessive, but in Persia, this was just good accounting. Because the king's auditor didn't flip through scrolls. He walked the rug. Literally. You watch now as he removes his shoes, steps onto the soft wool, and begins to pace. Each step lands on a different month. He stops at the panel marked for midsummer and peers at the alternating stripe patterns. His assistant squints, counts, whispers. They nod. A color shift in the 7th panel draws his attention. Red to maroon. That change likely denotes a variance in expected tribute, perhaps a partial drought-impacted harvest. And over in the winter section, a row of triangle motifs with black centers. Death. Well, not literal human death, just livestock losses. 1 triangle boxed 1 dead ox. Comforting, right? The rug doesn't lie, or if it does it very beautifully. This practice walking the report was not merely theatrical, it was functional. The large-scale display allowed the auditor to see the whole year at once, to catch inconsistencies in rhythm, tone, and color. Kind of like noticing when your spreadsheet suddenly changes font halfway through. Except instead of Arial and Times New Roman, it's camel-colored tulips and spiraling cypress trees. Now you might ask, why not just use clay tablets? Well, they did. But rugs had 3 major advantages. 1, a durability. Wool lasted, scrolls tore, clay broke. 2, portability. Large rugs could be folded and stored without smudging ink or losing pieces. 3, costini, symbolic weight. When you unrolled a carpet before the king's auditor, you weren't just showing tribute, you were demonstrating respect, legitimacy, and artistic loyalty. Because remember, this was Persia. Style mattered. If you're going to report a goat shortage, you may as well do it in style. Of course, there were expectations. Each fiscal rug had to adhere to specific standards set by the Ministry of Weaving and Tribute documentation. Yes, that's a thing. These included approved color schemes to avoid emotional distortion of data, not per inch ratios for symbol clarity, motif sequencing guidelines because no one wants three camel symbols in a row. It's bad luck, shahoy bad, and bad math. But some satraps, ever the overachievers, went beyond the minimum. One governor from Parthia had his tribute rug scented with saffron and lined with silver tassels. Another, from Lydia, embedded pearls at the center of each border motif. Did this make the data more accurate? Absolutely not. Did it make the auditor smile? Legend says yes. You watch now as the current auditor reaches the end of the rug and kneels. There's a final panel, a wide stripe filled with repeating rosettes. He counts them silently. These are the performance indicators. They represent not just what was delivered, but how well the satrap handled their region. A rose with 5 petals stable governance, one with 4 minor unrest, 3 petals bandits. Again, the auditor frowns. A 4-petal rose in late autumn. He taps his stylus, makes a note. He'll recommend moderate corrective attention, which probably means a politely stern letter and a few extra soldiers next season. And maybe less saffron in next year's rug. You sit back, amazed. Because while everyone remembers Persian carpets for their beauty, few realize how many were functional. How many walked a fine line between art and archive. This fiscal rug will now be carefully rolled, sealed in cedar cloth, and stored in a royal archive. One day, a future bureaucrat will unroll it again, maybe centuries later, and read the empire's pulse through wool. They might even smile at the artistry, or groan at the inconsistent rosette spacing. You walk over to a smaller rug set beside the grand one. It's labeled simply Supplementary Detail Fiscal Clarifications. Ah yes, the appendix. This smaller carpet contains backup data quantities per city, breakdowns of wine types, a debated shipment of possibly defective oxen, and a confusing entry involving one very large goose. The goose is woven with wings spread, and what might be a question mark stitched above its head. No one knows what happened to it, but you get the feeling the auditor remembers. You look up now at the vast throne room. The sunlight has shifted again, painting golden bands across the mosaic floor. The rugs are being rolled. The assistants are dusting scrolls. The process is complete. But as you walk away, you notice something. The auditor just for a moment traces a finger across a single motif in the final border. A tiny spiral embroidered in copper thread. You recognize it. It's a symbol for time, for cycles, for continuity, and maybe for remembrance. Because in an empire of swords and scrolls, the most enduring record was the one underfoot. And it was beautiful. You exhale softly, almost reverently, as the massive fiscal carpet is rolled away. The sound it makes wool folding on wool is the kind of thing that could lull even the most restless scribe to sleep. You trail your fingers along the silk cord that binds it, and a curious thought drifts into your mind. What if the carpet was lying? Not metaphorically, literally. What if the thread didn't just carry taxes, but trickery? Tonight, you're following the yarn all the way to one of the most charmingly absurd episodes in ancient bureaucratic history. The camel hair scandal. Yes, this was real. Because if there's one universal truth in human history, it's this: someone, somewhere, is always trying to game the system with cheap materials. You're now standing in the cool, shadowed halls of a regional warehouse near the southern edge of the empire. The air is sharp with the scent of lanolin and drying herbs. Bolts of textiles are stacked like stone walls around you. To your left, wool. To your right, silk. And in the back, camel hair. A lot of it. More than there should be. The clerk overseeing this facility, let's call him Duriash, is deeply, deeply suspicious. See, the annual tribute rug from this province arrived weeks ago. Beautiful. Tight knots. Correct motifs. No missing tassels. On the surface, it was perfect. Too perfect. And when Duriash inspected the weave up close, he noticed something strange. The texture felt wrong, not coarse, not soft, just slightly off. A little springy, almost crunchy. You lean closer and press your own palm against the sample he's laid out. And there it is. Camel hair. The scandal of the season? Because in ancient Persia, camel hair was considered an inferior fiber for certain categories of state rugs. It frayed easily. It didn't hold dye well. And crucially, it absorbed moisture in a way that could distort symbolic motifs over time. Using camel hair in a tax rug was like printing your IRS forms on wet cardboard. You just didn't do it. But someone did. Duriash files an official complaint to the Ministry of Weaving and Fiscal Conduct, which, yes, is a real-sounding title, even if no one ever embroidered it on a robe. The inquiry is launched, a committee is formed, looms are inspected, weavers are questioned. It's all very dramatic. Turns out, the satrap's quartermaster had been cutting costs. Rather than using high-grade wool from palace-certified sheep, he'd instructed local weavers to blend in camel hair cheap, plentiful, slightly coarse, but nearly indistinguishable to the untrained eye. The goal: create a tax rug that looked full wool, but wasn't. Because remember, rugs weren't just records. They were payments in themselves. The better the wool, the higher the value. By substituting camel hair, the satrap could 1. Save money on materials, 2. Pocket the difference, 3. And still technically deliver a rug that passed inspection unless someone like Darius got involved. You can almost hear the weavers now. Look! We're following the pattern. The knot count is correct. We're just blending a little. But the ministry did not agree. They issued a strongly worded ruling. Any falsification of material, regardless of design fidelity, shall be considered an act of economic deception. Translation: if your rug lies, so do you. This led to a new mandate: material transparency tags. You wander now into a smaller chamber lined with official reference swatches. Here, each rug has a small stitched square along the border, a kind of woven contents label. It shows the percentage of fibers used: 90% sheep wool, 5% goat hair, 5% silk blend, and if you see much camels anywhere near the list, camel. You sigh audibly. This new system helped for a while, until that got gamed too. Certain regions began dyeing camel hair with special glosses to simulate the sheen of finer wool. Others would mix just enough proper wool into the topmost layer, so an inspector touching the surface would be fooled. Meanwhile, the core all camel. It became a battle of deception and detection. In response, the ministry began hiring fiber testers, a fancy title for people who could distinguish sheep from camel with just their fingers and noses. You meet one of them now. An older man, stoic, wearing a robe full of tiny grease spots. His name is Babak, and he can identify 47 distinct regional wools with his eyes closed. He lets you hold a sample and says quietly, "Smell that." You smell the sand. You nod, or at least pretend to. That's camel. It holds desert. Wool holds mountain. You're not sure if it's science or poetry, but you believe him. Babak later testified in a tribunal against the satrap who greenlit the camel hair scheme. The trial was quiet, dignified, and the punishment. All rugs submitted that year were declared null. The satrap had to repay the value in silver. No rugs, no flair, just cold coins. And the weavers, they were ordered to remake the tribute rugs in proper wool, by hand, without pay. It was controversial. Some claimed the weavers weren't at fault. Others argued they should have refused, but in a hierarchical empire, refusal wasn't always an option. So they complied. And in one quiet act of protest, they stitched a single tiny camel silhouette hidden, upside down in the fringe of the final rug. It's still there, preserved in the archives. A little four-knot camel, hooves in the air. A joke, a memory, a signature. You smile, because even when punished, the weavers found a way to speak. You sit now in the corner of the inspection room, watching as new rugs are unfurled for testing. An apprentice pulls thread from a border sample and burns it slightly over a flame. The smell sheep. Confirmed. Another sample sizzles, crackles. The inspector frowns. Goat, someone asks. The inspector sniffs again. No, camel with vinegar? They tried to mask it. He writes fail on a slate board. The rug will be returned. The satrap warned. Again, it never ends. Because wherever there are rules, there are workarounds. But in Persia, those workarounds had texture. Sometimes rebellion came in motifs, sometimes in materials, sometimes in the very feel of the rug beneath your feet. You lie back once more, hands behind your head. The room is warm. The fibers scratch gently at your elbows. You feel the camel hair scandal fading into history, one laugh at a time. But that little upside-down camel, still smirking, still reminding everyone that behind every rule is a rug, and behind every rug, a weaver with opinions. The quiet laughter from that upside-down camel still lingers in your chest as you step out of the inspection room, into a long stone hallway where the light shifts from warm to shadowed. You walk slowly now, like someone tiptoeing through memories that don't quite belong to them. Because tonight, we're entering the most secretive, most theatrical, and frankly, most absurd dimension of Persian carpet use. Smuggling by tapestry? Yes. You're about to learn how people used rugs not just to report their taxes, but to dodge them, or bypass tariffs, or just sneak a few gemstones into the palace without anyone noticing. You turn a corner and find yourself inside a high-walled merchant's villa, one of those labyrinthine homes with courtyards, fountains, and enough shaded corridors to hide your conscience. This isn't just a residence, like it's a trading hub. And in the middle of it all, a massive rug, hung vertically like a tapestry, gold borders, geometric center. Absolutely flawless. Too flawless. You walk toward it, almost expecting someone to yell, "Don't touch that," but no one does. You run your hand along the edge and then you feel it. A bulge! Small, firm, about the size of a walnut. You press your fingers around the shape. It doesn't squish. It doesn't bend. You glance behind the rug. A hidden pocket, stitched directly into the backing. And inside, a gemstone. No bigger than a grape, but definitely more valuable than the entire room it's hiding in. You've just uncovered one of the slipperiest footnotes in Persian economic history. Textile smuggling through state carpets. Here's how it worked. Long before customs declarations and border checkpoints, the empire relied on official seals, trade guild approvals, and regional oversight to monitor the flow of valuable goods. Most of this worked. But rugs were exempt from many inspections. Why? Because rugs were sacred, functional, familiar. If a carpet had a tribute stamp, nobody wanted to damage it. No one wanted to unroll a rug in the dirt and poke around its loops. So merchants, being the creative creatures they've always been, found a way. They started building false seams, hidden compartments, reinforced backing, hollow tassel cords, sometimes even double layers of weave, between which they'd tuck anything light and valuable coins. Silk threads, rolled scrolls, spices, even love letters. Yes, love letters. We'll come back to that. Now, this wasn't happening on every rug. But once the pattern was noticed, the empire had to respond. That response, random rug inspections, you step into a chamber now, cool, shaded, full of rolled carpets. Two guards are watching a merchant who is very nervous. One unrolls a rug halfway, taps along the surface, then pulls out a small bronze hook. With practiced skill, he slides the hook along the hem, pressing lightly. Clink. There it is. A small brass vial. No stamp, no explanation. The merchant sweats. A scroll is pulled from a pouch. The seal bears the emblem of a lesser-known satrap. The guards squint, then nod. Saltwater dye, one says. Code. Not the literal content, the phrase. It means we'll let this one go. Just don't get creative next time. You learn later that saltwater dye was one of dozens of phrases used by border guards to flag illicit cargo they chose not to confiscate. Because, like any empire, Persian officials knew when to look the other way, especially if the rug was nice. But not all smugglers were so subtle. There's the infamous tale of the hanging of Ecbatana. Not an execution, but a rug scandal so dramatic it made its way into the letters of at least 3 different scribes. Here's what happened. A tribute rug, destined for the capital, was delivered with great ceremony. 5 meters long, dyed crimson and indigo, intricate medallion pattern with tiny silver threads, possibly a bribe baked into the aesthetic. But during storage, a junior servant noticed something strange. The rug seemed heavy, too heavy. When it was finally inspected, they found inside the central knot pile a sealed scroll implicating a high-ranking merchant in black market sandalwood trade, 6 garnets, and a letter signed by a noblewoman addressed to someone not her husband. Cue chaos. The scroll was never officially entered into record. The garnets disappeared. The noblewoman's name was redacted. But the rug burned. Publicly. A message to everyone that, while Persian bureaucracy might be soft, it was not stupid. You wander now into a quieter space, the courier quarters. This is where the rugs moved. You see long benches, wool packs, seals, dye tags, but more importantly, you see the tools. Small knives, thread picks, bone needles, hooks. This wasn't just for maintenance, this was access. Couriers were often accused of being part-time smugglers. Not all, of course, but enough to spark concern. A courier might receive a sealed rug, cut a small hole, insert an item, and restitch it exactly. The patterns were tight, the wool was dense, the change invisible unless you ran your fingers across the grain backward. You try it now. On a sample rug laid out in the corner, you stroke the pile against the weave, and sure enough, there's a slight rise. Another hidden thread? You smile. And here's where it gets even stranger. Some historians believe entire messages were smuggled this way. Not just between merchants, but between lovers, rebels, satraps spying on one another, diplomats too cautious to use ink. Instead of sending a scroll, you'd encode your words in the carpet, perhaps using tassel length, fringe curl direction, or dyed thread and knot count sequences. Some rugs even used beads. Tiny stone fragments embedded like punctuation, guiding the recipient to read the pattern like a riddle. One recovered piece from near the Caspian Sea had 32 glass beads embedded across its surface. No one's deciphered them. One theory, a map. Another, a love poem. A third, less romantic take inventory markers. This rug covers 7 trade items. Stop trying to make it cute. You decide to believe it was a poem. Because why not? If you had to smuggle a secret across half a continent, wouldn't you want it to ride wrapped in luxury? And yet, despite all the schemes, all the trickery, all the clever knots and stitched flirtations, the empire never collapsed under the weight of smuggled rugs. In fact, it adapted. Eventually, certain rugs were designed to be carriers. Folded corners with extra space, detachable fringe, slide-out backing panels. The empire labeled them multi-purpose tribute textiles. You pause? That's just a very fancy phrase for legalized smuggling. And maybe, in a way, that was the solution all along. If you can't stop people from hiding things in rugs, just make it official. You lie down again, head resting on the edge of a well-traveled runner. The scent of sandalwood still clings to the fibers. Maybe someone smuggled it. Long ago. Maybe not. But as your eyes close, you imagine the courier sneaking a wink at the weaver, the merchant slipping a scroll between the loops, a noblewoman brushing her fingertips along a pattern that says, "Meet me by the vineyard wall." It was never just a carpet. It was a container, a confession, a secret so soft, you'd never think to question it. Until you did. You wake, or rather float into the next room of this endless wool-lined dream. Everything is a little softer now. The walls curve. The light pulses gently, like the rhythm of a loom rocking back and forth. You're no longer in a village. Not in a merchant's villa. Not even in the capital. You're in a government office. Yes, really? Because tonight, You've wandered into the strange, bureaucratic heart of something most historians still blink at in disbelief. Why, the Ministry of Weaving. It sounds made up, doesn't it? Like a department invented by someone who drank too much mulberry wine and fell asleep on their mother-in-law's carpet. But this was a real system, real officials, real titles, and their job? To oversee the production, standardization, inspection, and aesthetic compliance of state-sanctioned carpets. You stretch, crack your knuckles, and peek into the antechamber. A small plaque reads Office of Motif Regulation, Year 8 of Artaxerxes II. The clerk sitting inside is dabbing ink onto a silk ledger, flipping slowly through a scroll that appears to contain nothing but tiny drawings of leaves. He frowns, crosses one out. You've just met the aesthetic compliance team. Yes, even under one of the world's most advanced empires, someone was tasked with making sure a rose looked like a rose. But the ministry wasn't just about appearances. It was created to bring order to a growing mess. You see, as the carpet tax system expanded, so did the variety of motifs. Each region had its own symbols, its own codes, its own dialect of design. It was creative chaos. And at some point, the central government decided enough. So they established the ministry. Its core missions included cataloging, acceptable patterns, standardizing, colors for tax motifs no more as that maroon or just angry red, defining, tribute motifs by sector jay, barley, wine, sheep, wheat, skilled labor, tax forgiveness, and most importantly, regulating error tolerance. Yes, even in 400 BCE, someone invented quality control. You slip into the pattern archive. This is a vast chamber scroll racks on every wall, bolts of fabric samples rolled into wooden tubes. You open one. Inside a tiny stitched square of wool marked Border Southern Zagros Year 3 Xerxes. The motif A stylized cow horn with 3 dots. Translation livestock plus 3 units delivered. You find another winter wine tally motif. Coastal satrapies only. It's purple, shaped like a spiral grapevine. And another motif retired due to confusion with goat symbol. Do not use after year 12. Apparently, there was once a widespread issue where the goat and barley motifs looked too similar. Several satraps were charged with underreporting barley due to a missed knot. It caused a panic. The ministry responded with a new rule. Each motif must differ from its nearest symbol by at least 3 loops or 2 color bands. You blink slowly. This is one of the most delightfully obsessive things you've ever encountered. You shuffle into another corridor labeled Dye Compliance. The air smells sharp like vinegar and something vaguely floral. This is where they standardized pigments. Because dyes were more than pretty colors, they were data. They had to hold their meaning. And if your tribute carpet showed grain motifs in red instead of saffron, that wasn't just a fashion crime, it was fraud. So the ministry created the color ledger. What? You glance at a tablet on the wall. Yellow, it's got wheat. Orange, barley. Blue, water rights or aqueduct labor. Brown, livestock. Purple, exotic goods spices. Incense, perfumes. White, military service. Red, delinquency or disputed goods. Suddenly, carpets are no longer quaint. They're calculated. You imagine a ministry agent arriving in a town unannounced. He unfolds a sample rug from headquarters, compares it to the local tribute rug. Why is your wheat motif ochre? He demands. Last year it was sunflower. That's 2 shades off compliance. The weaver stammers. The satrap sweats. The auditors roll their eyes. A report is filed. Back in the capital, the case is reviewed. And a new memo is issued ochre acceptable for wheat in southern regions, during drought conditions only. And thus, the color addendum is born. You find it now, tucked behind a ledger, a scroll labeled Revised Dye Guidelines, Fiscal Year 11. It's longer than you expect. Someone even added illustrations. But here's the real surprise: the ministry wasn't just top-down. It held competitions. Yes, carpet pattern competitions. Weavers from across the empire were invited to submit new motif suggestions to represent changing economic categories. You find a list posted on a cracked stone slab. Best new motif for tax amnesties. Most accurate livestock symbol goat versus. Ram, most legible knot configuration in dim lighting. The winners received state recognition, dye rations, and on rare occasions a small silver ring stamped with the emblem of the weaving ministry, a hand holding a thread, circled by stars. You can't make this up. One entry became legendary, the wheat flame motif, used to mark surplus in agricultural tribute. It was designed by a 19-year-old weaver from Media who claimed the idea came to her in a dream. The motif combined yellow silk flame shapes with staggered dots, indicating not only quantity but the quality of the grain. The ministry loved it. It was adopted for nearly 80 years. Of course, not every submission was accepted. Some were rejected for being too abstract, visually redundant, or, in one glorious case, politically aggressive for a motif representing poultry. You don't ask. You now enter the final chamber simply labeled the vault. Here, behind iron doors, are the most sacred rugs in the entire system. The master templates. These were never used, only copied from. Each is pristine. Stored flat, no folds. Temperature controlled by ancient standards thick walls. Cedar planks, charcoal dehumidifiers. The rugs are color true, line perfect. These are the standard bearers. The auditors carried replicas of these into the field, like mobile references. If a carpet didn't match the master motifs within tolerance, it was flagged. If it exactly matched but looked rushed, it was flagged anyway. Because remember, Persian administration was many things, but sloppy, never. You kneel beside one of these templates now. Its border gleams slightly from age-preserved dye. The inner field contains only 5 symbols: a grain stalk, a 2-headed goat, a crescent with stars, a scroll-like knot, a spiral sun. These 5 stood for the empire's core obligations: food, livestock, lunar labor cycles, law, and tribute seasons. Everything, in the end, woven into 5 tiny motifs. You touch them gently. The wool is warm. And for the first time tonight, you feel it, not just the rhythm, not just the knowledge, but the structure of empire. This wasn't just about beauty. It was about clarity, order, a woven logic. The Ministry of Weaving may sound whimsical, but it held the very shape of the empire together. Without it, chaos. Overlapping codes, misread rugs, tax shortages, border disputes, satraps faking patterns, couriers arguing over goat motifs again. But with the ministry, harmony, or something close to it. You sit there a moment longer, the silence of the vault wrapping around you like a soft shawl. You trace one final symbol, the scroll knot. For record keeping, for memory, for all the things we try to preserve quietly, carefully so we don't forget who we are, you leave the vault quietly. The silence of the master template still clinging to your sleeves like a fine layer of old dust. The torchlight flickers as you walk, and your feet make almost no sound on the woven runners beneath you, rugs so perfect you feel bad stepping on them. You pause, glance back once, and then press forward. Because what comes next isn't quite so peaceful. No, tonight, you step out of bureaucracy and into something messier, louder, smellier. You're riding into the carpet burnings of Susa. Yes, burnings, plural, with actual fire. Because sometimes even the most intricate systems push people too far. Even thread can snap. Let's set the scene. You're in Susa, a key administrative hub of the Achaemenid Empire, second only to Persepolis in influence. It's hot. Always hot. The kind of heat that makes tempers dry and breakable. The city pulses with trade caravans, chariot wheels grinding over stone. The buzz of tax collectors reciting quota figures like bedtime stories gone wrong. But lately, something's changed. The satrap of Susa Young, polished, with a beard too perfect to trust, has instituted new tribute demands. not new categories of goods. Oh no, that would be too simple. He's demanding monodata precision. Every tribute carpet now has to include triple knot borders, certified dye gradation, and get this a second layer for backup motifs, just in case the outer weave fades. It's like demanding a receipt for a receipt. The people not pleased? Weavers complain of bleeding fingers. Merchants grumble about spending more on dye than they earn in grain. Even the guild elders, normally deferential, begin to mutter. And then it happens. A courier returns from the capital with a rejected rug. Not due to incorrect taxes. No. The reason. Aesthetic irregularity and third border. That was the quote. The rug was perfect, but one flower petal in the outermost edge bent slightly left instead of right. Possibly from humidity. Possibly from emotion. No one cares. The rejection means a doubling of the next tribute. And insult to injury, the rug is returned folded improperly, with the vizier's official stamp burned into its center. It is an outrage. And that's when the weavers of Susa decide to make a statement. They gather in the outer square. Quiet at first. Dozens. Then hundreds. Guild members, apprentices, even the dye boys with red-stained palms and too many opinions for their age. They drag out rugs, not the new ones. Not tribute. The old ones. Rejected ones. Discarded ones. And they burn them. Pile after pile. Stacked like scrolls. Torched at the edges with cedar splinters and oil-soaked rags. The fire burns high, the smoke turning the pale stone buildings into shadows. And the messages, clear as knotwork. We will not unweave ourselves for your convenience. This is not art. It is accounting. You're not buying beauty, you're demanding blood. Let the Empire walk barefoot for once. Eyewitnesses say the fires burned for 2 nights. And the flames weren't just symbolic. The rugs they torched weren't all garbage. Some were actual tribute reports, meaning entire villages were now unrecorded, unaccounted for. The ledger's blank. The Ministry of Weaving scrambled to respond. First came the rhetorical press release. Okay, not literally, but a royal dispatch was issued. The flames in Susa were the result of local miscommunication and improper dye storage. Investigations are ongoing. Tribute processes remain uninterrupted. Uninterrupted. Sure. As long as you ignore the rising scent of rebellion drifting through the rest of the empire. Because Susa wasn't alone. Within weeks, reports trickled in from Ecbatana, Babylon, and parts of media rugs being destroyed intentionally. Not all in protest, some out of fear, some as a kind of symbolic cleansing villagers deciding that old data no longer belonged to them. This became known only half-jokingly as the Weaver's Autumn. Carpet production dropped. Audits were delayed. Entire tribute seasons went unrecorded. And the empire shook. But here's the fascinating part. Rather than retaliate with full military force, a very on-brand Persian response, the king's advisors did something surprising. They listened. Reforms were introduced. Tribute rug complexity was simplified. Border design tolerance was widened. A new category was introduced. Regional motif grace clause. It allowed each province one symbolic flourish per rug, a motif or design that did not have to be interpreted as tax data. A rose that meant a rose. A tree that didn't represent lumber quotas, but actual shade. It was a small concession, but it mattered. You walk now through a small room marked Post-Reform Designs. The air is calmer, the rugs more varied, less rigid. There's a softness to the borders, a willingness to allow expression. You stop before one labeled Hazekinas Susa, Year 2, After Fire. Its border is filled with curved flame motifs, not the tax flame, but actual stylized fire. And in the center, a dove. It's not a symbol of tribute. It's a memory and a dare. Even now, scholars debate the meaning of the fire rugs. Some say they were purely cathartic. Others argue they were encoded protests still under analysis. One theory, the flame motifs doubled as head counts. Each flicker of fire was madness, one voice burned by the system. Another theory, they were warnings: if you push too hard, we burn your records and your reach. But perhaps the most honest explanation is the simplest. The weavers had enough. They weren't accountants. They weren't tax code. They were human. And no matter how beautiful the empire system was, if it stopped serving the people, it became flammable. You exhale now, your breath slow and smoky in your throat, as if you'd been near the fire yourself. You think about how something so warm, so soft, so precise could become a weapon, or a message, or both. And as you lie back once again, letting your weight rest on a rug woven long after the protest cooled, you feel the echo. Not in the pattern, but in the space between the knots, where something wild and wordless still flickers. The embers of Sousa's rebellion fade as the carpet under you shifts again softly, almost apologetically, like it's trying to smooth its own scorch marks. The smell of smoke is gone now, replaced by something more delicate: lavender, lanolin, and something unmistakably warm. Home. You're no longer in a palace or a government hall. You're in a modest courtyard house, somewhere along the empire's quieter edge. Pigeons coo on a nearby rooftop. The breeze carries the hush of an evening meal being prepared, grains boiling, flatbread crisping on clay walls. And inside, just beyond a blue curtain, a woman weaves. Tonight, you step into the heart of domestic economics, the unrecorded, unofficial, utterly essential role of women in Persia's tribute system. Not through rebellion, not through scandal, but through precision. Because now you learn about weaving wives and fiscal feuds. You pad silently across the tiled floor, watching her from the doorway. She sits at her loom, not upright like the palace looms, but tilted, low to the ground, angled so the weight of the pattern rests on her thighs. Her fingers move in time with her breath. In, out, not, tap, not again, tap. She's not making a rug for the market. She's not making a decorative piece. She's weaving an adjustment. This is her husband's third year of tribute errors. The first time, it was miscounted amphorae he underreported the wine yield. The second, a delivery missed due to a bridge washing out. This time, labor tax. They owe 6 days of skilled work, him and 2 sons, but only 4 have been completed. And instead of arguing with a scribe who will absolutely not care about sick donkeys or rebellious teenagers, she's solving it the way she knows best. She's weaving it in. You walk closer. This isn't a full carpet. It's a fiscal panel. A small insert meant to be stitched into the main rug as an addendum. Think of it as a textile amendment to last year's report. It's subtle, just a 40x40 centimeter square. But the motifs? Unmistakable. A column of 3 spirals, each made with 7 knots, labor completed. Then, next to them, a single spiraled double knot, a quiet confession of the missing days. She's not hiding it. She's folding the debt into beauty, and maybe softening the blow. These panels were common in households that couldn't afford fines. It was a delicate game under report, and you risked punishment, over-report, and you lost resources you couldn't spare. So women, mostly wives and mothers, became, the last line of fiscal defense. They were the ones with the thread, the time, and the hands that held the family's true record. Historians still argue whether these panels were officially recognized or simply tolerated, but many were found stored alongside palace-approved tribute rugs, clearly bundled for submission. And some included corner tassels dyed with paint. Forgiveness read. A signal that the weaver was requesting leniency. It didn't always work, but sometimes it did, because rug reading wasn't all math. It was mood, gesture, intention, and intention, when woven right, could carry more weight than numbers. You sit beside her now, watching as she adjusts the tension of a border knot. Her lips move silently. She's reciting something. A pattern? A memory? Maybe even a prayer. Behind her, her daughter sorts threads by hue wool, silk, goat hair, The daughter's learning the symbols too, but not from a book, from life. You wander now to the corner of the room, where three rolled carpets lean against the wall. Each is wrapped in thin linen. One is fraying. Another bears the faint scent of sheep oil. The last, new, still warm. You unroll it halfway and gasp softly. This rug isn't just tribute, it's family history. There's a spiral for each child born, a wheat stalk with extra lines representing a marriage dowry, and near the edge a symbol not in any official records. A broken yoke, a visual shorthand for the year her husband was injured and couldn't plow the fields. No one but told her to add it. No one approved it. But she wove it in anyway, because the person reading the rug may be a stranger, but the person who made it knew the truth. This wasn't rebellion. It was realism. And it raises a question. Were these women just documenting, or were they negotiating? A fringe theory beautiful and unprovable suggests that weavers began to use patterns strategically to influence tax judgment. A leafless tree near the corner, signal of hardship, a curled feather motif in the border plea for extension, a pale spiral stitch lower than the others, a quiet we're doing our best. You pass into a second room now, a kind of storage pantry for rugs, and there, in the dim light, you find something rare. A double weave. Two rugs stitched together at the edges, like pages of a book. The front is standard barley motifs, livestock rows, proper seasonal colors. The back, personal, not coded in tax language, but in local dialect. A small river, a mountain, a moon phase, a bird. This rug isn't meant for inspectors. It's meant for memory. You realize suddenly that some families wove two stories into each rug, one for the state, one for themselves. You sit quietly beside it now. You imagine the husband returning from a long day of labor. His wife shows him the panel. He sighs. She adjusts the knots. He nods. And in that simple exchange, they settle their account not just with the empire, but with each other. Later, when the panel is added to the main tribute carpet, it blends in seamlessly. Almost. A careful reader might spot it. But whether they judge or forgive, that depends on how much thread speaks louder than ink. You walk back outside now. The sun is setting. Chickens shuffle along the courtyard wall, and through the window, the loom keeps working. Not for gold, not for glory, but for balance. And in a world ruled by kings, armies, and bureaucrats with too much time and not enough empathy, these weaving wives held a quiet kind of power. The power to define how the empire saw them. One spiral at a time. The soft clack of the loom fades behind you, like footsteps from a memory you didn't know you had. The last image still flickers in your mind, her fingers weaving truth into the seams. Not because she had to, but because someone had to remember. And now, the air shifts again. Cooler, tighter, a hint of ink, the faint sound of parchment unrolling. You've entered the shadowy margins of the empire, no longer in broad courtyards or open chambers, but down a winding hallway with torches guttering low and walls lined with hanging rugs that seem not quite official. Welcome to the world of Nike spies, symbols, and the missing thread. Because of course, wherever there's a system, someone's going to use it for more than its original purpose. And in Persia, that meant turning carpets into covert communication channels. You're in what historians call the border archive, a small outpost near the edge of the empire where tribute rugs arrive, reports are written, and occasionally, messages disappear. You stand before a rug unlike any other. Smaller, stranger, and unmistakably wrong. It's all there, the pattern structure, the usual motifs, even the approved colors, but something's off. Too symmetrical. Too deliberate. The kind of deliberate that doesn't feel beautiful. It feels encoded. You kneel beside it and notice the inner band, an elegant chain of crescent symbols, each touching the next. But on the far end, one crescent is missing. Just one. The thread is still there. The base weave is intact. But the design has a gap. A blank space where the eye expects closure. And that's the message. The missing thread, a code used, some believe, by information couriers in the western provinces. It signaled loss, disruption, silence. If you received a rug with this flaw, it meant the message was intercepted, or worse, the messenger was caught. You sit back, the air suddenly heavier. Not every tribute rug was what it appeared to be. Some were covers. You walk now through a corridor known as the tassel room. Not decorative, not delicate. These tassels aren't for beauty. They're data holders, but each one slightly different in length, twist, or a thread count. In the right configuration, they formed numerical sequences. A basic cipher, 5 long tassels, start, 3 short, 1 long, third satrap downriver has defected, 2 twisted, still loyal, 1 cut, eliminated. Most people saw nothing but fringe. But the right reader could see betrayal, alliance, a shift in power. Some rugs even had inverted motifs by the flowers that bloomed upside down. Not an accident. They meant something specific. One theory suggests that they referenced code names. Another theory directions. Inverted vine, Genasienus, move south. Mirrored wheat, delay delivery. Backwards goat? Well, you can guess. You pull aside one heavy wall rug, and behind it, tucked into a hollow niche, you find a spool of loose thread wrapped in parchment. The parchment reads, delivered via motif adjustment. No further contact. Pattern holds. Chills. This wasn't fantasy. It was espionage, woven. We have records of at least 3 royal scribes who noted inconsistencies in rugs submitted from border regions, each containing strange repetitions, odd dye choices, or tassel irregularities that do not correspond to tribute protocol. Did they crack the code? Unknown. What we do know is that rug-based communication, point post, worked because it didn't raise suspicion. Who questions a carpet? Who double-checks a spiral? Who unknots the fringe? You walk into the dot interrogation chamber. Next, not dark and brutal, but quiet, discreet. Here, tribute rugs suspected of holding secrets were laid out. Not to be admired, but interrogated. You find one rug from a now-lost satrapy that includes a border of stylized horses, each horse pointing east. All except one. One horse turns west. The pattern repeats. Some say it was nothing. Others suggest it was a directive. Change course. The trade path has shifted. West is safe. Or it could have meant they're watching. And if that feels like a stretch, remember we've seen similar tricks in other cultures. Inca Quipus used knot placement for numeric records. Viking carvings hid messages in ornament. Even medieval monks inserted tiny initials into illuminated text quiet. Visual signatures of protest or ownership? Why not Persia? Why not rugs? And there's more. A traveler's journal found near the edge of what is now modern-day Afghanistan contains a brief, peculiar note. Arrived at the weaver's house, third rug on the left bears the sign. Border knot miscounted by 1. Will adjust plan. That's it. No context, no elaboration. But the meaning is clear. Rugs were dead drops. Communication devices. You didn't need ink when you had thread. You didn't need messengers when you had looms. Some even say that during the Greco-Persian Wars, rugs carried yucky strategic leaks. False information embedded to deceive invading forces. A shepherd's rug might show a grain surplus where there was none. Or a border motif might suggest a settlement had more soldiers than it did. Psychological warfare, made comfy. But perhaps the most intimate example, the lover's rug. You find it rolled gently in a corner alcove. Faded, unassuming, until you look closely. The main field is covered in repeating vine spirals. Common enough, but every third spiral is tighter? Not visibly, only when you press it. The tension changes. One theory is that these tighter spirals represent syllables, and when mapped against a known name, they match. This wasn't tribute. This was a message. From one weaver to another. Maybe a declaration. maybe an apology, maybe just "I remember." And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The border curls form letters, the tassel length punctuation, the dye's emotions. The entire rug becomes a letter, and the loom a voice. The missing thread doesn't always signal absence. Sometimes it means presence, the part too sacred to show. The secret you leave blank because anything more would be too much. You lie down once more on a rug that may or may not be hiding something. You don't know the motifs. You don't speak the code. But as your head rests gently against the fringe, you swear you can feel it like a pulse beneath the wool. A message. Not for you, but through you. You don't need to understand it. You just have to keep it safe. You don't get up right away. The rug beneath you is too comfortable now, not just in texture, but in knowing. It knows too much. Holds too much. Like you're lying on a diary written in silence. But the wind outside has shifted again, and it carries something unexpected. Not smoke, not ink, not sheep oil. Dust. Trade dust. Because now, you're not in a weaving chamber or a royal archive. You're on the road. Literally, you're about to follow a rug not as a symbol, not as a record, but as a traveler. Because Persian carpets didn't just stay within Persian borders. They moved. Farther than you. Farther than most armies. They were tribute, yes, but also ambassadors. Couriers, smugglers, merchants, diplomats, and sometimes contraband. So tonight, you trace the woolen threads of carpets that traveled more than you. You begin at a satrapy near the Indus River, a small, bustling region with elephants, mangoes, and a fondness for overdying things in purple. Here, a tribute carpet is being packed, not for the capital, but for trade. Because not all rugs went up the chain. Some went outward. This particular one is being shipped via camel caravan to a port in the Persian Gulf. From there, it'll pass through the hands of at least 5 merchants. It will be unrolled, admired, sniffed, measured, negotiated, rolled again, and tied to the back of a boat. By the time it reaches its next home, it will have gained weight from humidity, from stories, from being walked on in 5 languages. And by then, it will no longer be a carpet. It will be a currency. You pass now into the marketplace of Babylon, a chaos of sound and color and the scent of roasting dates. A trader from Sogdia is holding a carpet up to the light not for art, but for accuracy. He wants to know if the border pattern is authentic. If the tassel spacing is northern style or forged southern, it matters. This isn't just decoration, it's a guarantee. Rugs were identification, no? A regional passport, a declaration of origin. The knots told you who you were. The dies told you where you'd been. And if the spirals were mirrored, you were trying to pretend you came from somewhere richer. Merchants knew. Carpet inspection was a trade skill half economic, half psychological. Some buyers would only deal in grain-heavy rugs, meaning those from agricultural satrapies. Others prized dry border weaves, said to hold their shape better in sea air. And yes, rugs were often paid for in other rugs. Rug-for-rug exchanges. Imagine that. 2 merchants in Ecbatana, sitting on folded piles, bartering knot count for a knot density. You can't help but smile at the idea of a bidding war over fringe quality. But not all rugs were equal. Some, especially those used for imperial gifts, were one of a kind. These traveled farther still, across rivers, mountains, and empires. One such rug, stitched in Susa with an unusually dense knot count and dyed in a rare bark pigment from modern-day Turkmenistan, was gifted to an Indian prince in exchange for a royal elephant. Yes, an elephant. The rug made it across the Hindu Kush. The elephant. Not so lucky. Historians say the prince never walked on the carpet. He had it mounted on the wall behind his throne. Not because of its beauty, but because of its secrets. You walk into that chamber now. It's dim, warm, scented with camphor and rose. The carpet is still there framed. Faded, but intact. A preserved emissary. In its threads are dozens of encoded details. Some say it contained a border-to-border grain tally, others that it held the tribute signature of the entire 18th satrapy. One theory, it was a declaration of alliance woven in the form of a prayer wheel, meant to bless the space without anyone knowing. You reach out, feel the spiral at the center, the direction of the knots counterclockwise, which means something. You just don't know what, but you're not alone in that confusion. When these carpets reached Greece, they caused something between confusion and awe. Hellenic traders referred to them as talking rugs or mute maps. Some tried to copy them. Others dismissed them as barbaric clutter. But one Athenian merchant was so captivated, he hired a Persian defector to teach him the motifs, paid him in olive oil and figs. What happened? The merchant became one of the earliest known rug forgers. His designs mimicked Persian code, but made no sense. A swirl meant grain in one section, then goats in another. The whole rug was gibberish. But it looked right. He sold them anyway. And that's how imitation tribute rugs became a brief trade fad. Because in foreign markets, the meaning didn't matter. The look did. A real Persian rug, especially one bearing official motifs, meant status, legitimacy, luxury, and mystery. You were someone who dealt in empires. And yet, not all exported rugs made it to their intended buyers. Some were stolen, others repurposed. You enter a small port now, near the edge of the Red Sea. A sailor is wrapping himself in what once was a tribute rug. He's cold. He doesn't know that the border tassels once represented oil quotas. He just thinks it's warm. That's the fate of many rugs. Once lost, their meaning vanishes. Only the thread remains. Sometimes a rug meant we paid our debt. Other times we told no one. You step now into a museum, modern, glass-walled, strangely sterile. A young curator leads you to a display marked Persian Export, origin unknown. The tag says likely decorative, unknown age, floral motif, excellent preservation. But you see it. The spirals that stop midline, the mirrored goat symbol, the half-flower leaning east. This wasn't decoration. It was a tax confession or a love letter, or both. And now it's under lights, behind glass, admired by people sipping espresso and guessing where the colors came from. None of them know it once rode behind a satrap's caravan, or sat on the floor of a minor king, or held the ashes of a burned ledger no one wanted to rewrite. You kneel, touch the glass, and for a second, you imagine the rug stretching its threads toward you. Remember where I've been. It whispers. You do. Because carpets don't just cover space. They move through it. They carry footsteps, salt, secrets. And you followed one all the way from a loom to a border, to a market, to a gallery. It's traveled more than most people ever do. And now, it's carrying you. The museum lights dim as you turn away from the display case. The glass whispers behind you, soundless but final, like the closing of a book that was never quite read right. You walk slowly now. Your feet trace across a long gallery runner, not just any carpet, but a replica of an original seal-bearing tribute rug. Woven once for a king, folded once in fear, and stored far too long beneath a temple floor. It's time to talk about stains, seals, and the truth beneath the pile. Because not every tribute carpet told its story with patterns alone. Some left evidence that couldn't be designed out. Imperial wax seals, ink smudges, scented oils, blood, sometimes even wine. Yeah, and those marks, they weren't just accidental. They were evidence. Start with the seals. You pause now in front of a wide panel rug stretched across a low table. The colors have faded, sunstruck, and age-bled, but right there, in the bottom right corner, you see a lump. Not part of the weave. It's wax. Hard, dulled, but unmistakably pressed with the symbol of a lion grasping a date palm. That's the emblem of the High Treasury Office of Persepolis. Circa 435 BCE. It means this carpet wasn't just accepted. It was endorsed. Carpets like these were marked physically sealed the way scrolls were, except instead of paper, the wax was pressed directly onto the fiber, usually in the border, sometimes in the fringe. The seal did three things. 1. Confirmed receipt by imperial authority. 2. Verified the carpet's integrity, no tampering post-submission. 3. Indicated the level of scrutiny past light review, full audit, or the dreaded referred for reweave. You step closer and spot a second mark. This one's fainter. Red-brown, near the middle field. At first glance, wine, but under certain light. Ink. Ink on a rug. Yes, because sometimes rugs were annotated, especially when used in regional offices. Clerks tired, dusty, hungry would jot quick marks under the edge of a carpet to track delivery dates or cross-reference with a ledger. Paid late, resend, or the ever-depressing check goats. These marks weren't meant to last, but they did, especially when the ink bled. There's one recovered carpet from Western Iran kept in a glass humidity-controlled drawer that still bears the faint imprint of a note. Wrong dye field adjusted. Do not report. No one knows who wrote it, but someone hid. And then there are the stains no one likes to talk about. One tribute rug recovered from the ruins of a collapsed archive showed distinct traces of blood, not in a dramatic war trophy way, but in a single blot, near the upper tassel line. Unreadable. Undecoded. One theory a courier accident, another a punishment. Either way, the carpet was never cleaned. The stain faded, but the knots held. And what about wine? Plenty of rugs were stained with that too. Some deliberately. A strange and oddly charming practice emerged among some satrapal houses, spilling a drop of wine on the final rug as a blessing. Supposedly, it symbolized abundance, generosity, an offering. One vizier reportedly complained in a letter, "They spoil the fibers with grape rot and call it sacred. My office is a vineyard of false humility." You chuckle softly. Even in empires, some things never change. But of all the non-thread elements added to tribute carpets, the most curious may be scent. You step into a small enclosed chamber now lined with linen. No airflow. And on a table, a rolled carpet rests in a cedar box. You unroll it gently, and the scent hits you. Lavender. And something else. Frankincense. Yes, possibly. This wasn't random. Some regions began scenting their rugs intentionally, not for deception, but for diplomacy. If a satrap wanted favor, wanted their tribute to arrive, persuasive, they'd infuse the carpet with a scent associated with temples or kingship, or just something the vizier liked. It worked. One correspondence from a clerk in Persepolis mentions, "The tribute from Carmania arrived perfumed. The vizier inhaled, nodded, and requested figs. Audit delayed until summer. You smile. Power sometimes comes through the nose." And then we come to the repaired rugs. Because not all stains were honored. Some were covered up. There's a carpet from the northeastern provinces with an entire quadrant subtly overwoven. Different tension. Slightly thicker wool. Clearly meant to hide something. Was it a mistake A correction? Or a stain someone wasn't proud of? Some researchers believe these patches mark retracted data. The ancient version of oops, wrong column. A misreported goat count. An overestimated wheat quota. A labor mistake. The overweave fixed it visually, but not transparently. And when the vizier's auditors found such a patch, they'd cut it out. Literally. You step to the next rug on display, its center bears a rectangular hole. Not from decay, from inspection. The record says it was removed for material analysis. That's code for we thought someone lied. And then there are the rugs that bear multiple seals. You find one now. A narrow runner with 3 wax marks in different corners. One is the Treasury, one is the Ministry of Weaving, the last unfamiliar. A flame within a circle. Some say it was the seal of the Reconciliation Bureau. A temporary body that emerged after the carpet burnings of Susa. Its job verify repaired or duplicate carpets and decide if they could be reaccepted. These rugs restored tributes were both honored and doubted. You sit down beside one now. It's soft, quiet, but you can feel the history in it. Not in the patterns, but in the marks, the overlays, the discolorations, the seal that melted slightly in transport, the patch where someone tried clumsily to overdye a rejected color into something more acceptable. This is no longer a carpet. It's a negotiation. And that's the truth beneath the pile. Not perfection, but compromise. Because no empire runs on ideals. It runs on people stumbling, guessing, adjusting, knotting a little too tight, dabbing wax where it doesn't belong, hoping the pattern says enough to be accepted. You lie back once more. The rug beneath you isn't flawless, but it's honest. In its smudges, in its fringe, in the thread that was cut and stitched again. You rise from the rug with the three seals in one imperfect corner, dusting your hands off even though there's nothing on them. Just history, weightless but somehow heavy, and now you're moving again, through a passage that feels tighter than the last, not from stone or walls but from memory. Because what comes next isn't about rugs as tribute, or tools, or taxes. It's about legacy. You step into a quiet room, long and narrow, with light slanting in from a high slit in the wall. The sun casts a golden beam directly onto the center of the floor, where a single carpet rests. Not a fancy one, not imperial, no seals, no scent, not even symmetrical. But somehow it feels final. You found one of the rarest things in the entire Persian system. A heirloom carpet. And not heirloom as in value, but heirloom as in memory. Because some rugs, just a few, were never meant for government. Or for trade. Or even for travel. They were meant to be kept. They were family records. You kneel down beside it. This carpet isn't coated in official motifs. You don't see the sharp spiral of barley or the vine scroll for labor quota. Instead, there are figures human-shaped. Stick-limbed, some standing, some seated, one with arms extended. Primitive, maybe, but deliberate. The colors are softer than usual, not because they faded, because they were never bold to begin with. Pastels, earth tones, the shades of soil, milk, river reeds, and sky after rain. And this one, it was made by someone not trying to prove anything. Not justify, not manipulate, but simply remember. You spot a line of tiny symbols near the border. A sun, a child, a goat, a crescent moon, a broken stalk. You know enough now to read it. Habasis summer, firstborn, livestock gifted, new moon, failed harvest. A year, woven, not written. This was a memory rug, kept by families who couldn't write, but still wanted to preserve the shape of their lives. Some households, especially in more remote provinces, would weave one panel per year. A horizontal line of motifs stitched each winter, recounting the major events. Some added fringe to mark marriages. Others changed knot tension to reflect grief. It was unspoken but understood a knot done in silence meant death. A looser spiral illness. A skipped loop. A child who left and didn't return. And here's the beautiful part. No one else had to understand it. The family knew. It was theirs. A historian once found a carpet like this buried in a dry cave outside of Sardis. It was wrapped in cloth, surrounded by small clay figures and folded around a single wooden comb. Not a single imperial motif on it. But it told a whole life. The mother's story, the daughter's birth, a village dispute, a wedding, a drought, a recovery. No names. Just loops. Just color. Some of these rugs were passed down like titles. Others were cut into pieces when a family divided. One strip per child, each carrying a sliver of memory. You find a piece like that now, tacked gently to a museum wall. It's just a corner, no larger than a cushion, but it holds a perfect medallion surrounded by radiating lines. Sunlight, perhaps. Or generations. Some believe these medallions were person markers, not portraits, but presence. You didn't weave a face. You wove an energy, And if you looked at the rug long enough, you could tell who it was. You walk farther into the room, and now the walls bloom with them. Fragments, corners, saved edges. None of them imperial, none of them translated, but all of them alive. A pale rug with only 3 figures, one upright, one bent, one gone. A square of wool dyed in 3 bands. Green, white, green. Local scholars suspect it marked a year when a child left, then returned. One rug simply displays 5 birds flying upward. No border, no explanation. A curator notes possibly symbolic of migration or passing. Knots indicate uneven emotional tension. That phrase stops you. Uneven emotional tension. As if the loom knew how the weaver felt. And maybe it did. Because that's what makes these rugs different. They're not just about data, they're about being known. Most rugs said, "Here's what we gave." These say, "Here's what we lived." And sometimes that included sorrow. You find a long runner now, nearly threadbare with what looks like a standard row of grain motifs. But every 8th symbol is twisted. Not incorrectly, just off. Almost collapsed inward. Textile historians believe this pattern marked the loss of children, specifically miscarriages or stillbirths, which weren't always spoken aloud but were never forgotten. Some families refused to bury the memory, so they stitched it instead. Imagine a world where pain had a pattern, where grief was looped and anchored to survive time. It's no wonder some carpets were folded, kissed, and buried with their makers. In fact, in at least 12 recovered tombs, scholars found tightly rolled rugs placed beneath the body, not for warmth, not for comfort, but as proof. Proof that the life woven beneath them was lived, and remembered, and maybe forgiven. You sit now, hands in your lap, watching the soft patterns flicker in the fading light. You think of all the hands, not the kings, not the satraps, but the wives, the mothers, the lovers, the daughters, the tired men with calloused palms who stitched because they didn't have a scribe. You think about how many memories are missing not because they were forgotten, but because no one thought to save them in a form that the empire could read. But they were saved. In thread, in fringe, in faded spirals that meant joy or sickness, or just another hard winter survived. And as you lie down on the last rug in the room, a simple strip of wool, no symbols at all, you feel something loosen in your chest. You don't need a legend to read this one. You just need silence. Because silence, like you, can be a motif. You don't rise this time. You just turn your head, cheek against the wool, and let the silence carry you like a boat in shallow water. Because now you've reached the edge. Not of the rug or the empire, but the edge of memory itself. And what lingers here isn't just what was recorded, but what wasn't. This is the realm of lost patterns, forgotten weavers, and the rugs no one understands. You sit up slowly, surrounded by display cases that feel more like tombstones than showcases. In each one, a rug, or a fragment, or something that once was a rug, before the centuries softened it into myth. And each bears the same label, undeciphered. You lean over the first. It's oddly small, more like a tapestry fragment than a floor covering. The knotwork is tight, professional, but the motifs, they don't match any known region. A triple crescent border with central fields of wavy lines and repeating rhombuses. No one knows what it meant. The dye's local, but the technique foreign. The pattern off protocol? A whisper at the bottom reads, possibly a tribute rug from an unrecorded satrapy. Possibly, or maybe not a tribute rug at all. You move to the next display. A corner section with thick fringe and only one symbol, a 7-petaled flower, with a long stem stretching all the way to the edge. The weave density is inconsistent. Some knots loose, some jammed tight. No one can agree what it meant. One theory, a birth motif gone wrong. Another, a satire woven by a disillusioned guild worker who mocked official tribute symbols by stretching them until they meant nothing. And that's the haunting truth here. You're looking at the outliers, the pieces that didn't fit. Rugs made in the gaps between official systems and regional tradition. Rugs submitted but never archived. Rugs gifted but never explained. Rugs buried and only recently uncovered, in places no one expected them to be. One was found inside a cave, wrapped around a clay jug. Another used to line a coffin of a child who bore no royal seal. Another, still miraculously intact, was recovered beneath a collapsed barn preserved in goat dung and straw, its color still shockingly vivid. All of them unreadable. You look now at a rug known to historians as the unbroken spiral. It's a marvel. A single spiral, beginning at the center and winding out to the edges with no clear motif or pause. Thousands of knots. Not one duplicated pattern. No obvious code. No economic record. It makes no sense. And yet it's perfect. Some scholars insist it's ceremonial. Others claim it's a visual metaphor for time, or birth, or the afterlife. One rogue researcher called it an act of defiance against empire thinking. You'd believe any of those. But here's the truth. No one likes to write down. Some of these rugs were never meant to be read. Not by us. Maybe not even by their makers. Some were stitched from grief, or love, or madness, or boredom. Some by hands that didn't know the imperial codes and didn't care. Some were responses to trauma. Some were lullabies. There's a rug on the far wall that's entirely black. Jet-dyed wool. No symbols, no fringe. Just one square corner, left unknotted. The tag says unknown purpose, possibly unfinished. But the absence feels finished. It speaks, maybe of loss, or of a decision not to speak. You sit now before one last artifact displayed not in a frame, but rolled, frayed at the edge. It wasn't preserved for its importance. It survived by accident, found stuffed into a crack in a stone wall. It's small, a child's rug, perhaps, and stitched into its center, barely visible a sun. With 7 rays, you blink, because you've seen this before, or something like it. Back in Section 3 in the village with the young weaver girl, threading spirals with meaning, she'd stitched a sun motif 2 7 rays, you remember? And maybe, just maybe, this is a her rug, or her daughter's, or her memory. Unlabeled, undecoded, but connected. And suddenly you realize something. The Empire didn't build this legacy. The weavers did. One thread at a time. One borrowed motif. Passed from mother to child. Scribbled in wool. Altered in heartbreak. Mirrored in secret. Patterns moved faster than armies. Symbols outlived kings. Rugs whispered across centuries when the scrolls had long since burned. Not because anyone intended them to, but because softness lasts. We treat empire as stone, as iron. But maybe its true record is fabric. And maybe the rugs we can't read today are the ones that speak the loudest. You rest your hand on the edge of the display. Just fabric. Just knots. But also with the echoes of 1,000 lives no one archived. Maybe that's what these undeciphered carpets are. Carried memory. Untranslatable. But undeniable. And as the lights begin to dim, and the hallway narrows into sleep, you feel the weight of it all settle into your bones. Not everything needs to be decoded. Some things just need to be held. You walk slowly now. Not because you're tired, but because you're full. Not of food or facts, but of stories. Of thread. Of things felt more than explained. You've followed these rugs through fire and fraud, across empires and under floorboards. And now, with soft steps, you return to where it all began. Not to the palace, not even to the loom, but to the quiet space beneath your own feet. You've arrived at the heart of it all. The carpet as memory. Because long before it was tribute, or currency, or code, the carpet was simply a place to sit, a place to gather, a place where history didn't just happen, it was lived. You lie down one last time, your hands folded on your chest, as if you're preparing to dream with purpose. The carpet beneath you is simple, modest, unadorned, and yet you can feel everything it holds. The creak of the loom, the whispered argument between a weaver and a courier, the dye-stained fingers brushing away a child's tears, the spiral that meant barley and the one that meant not this year, the fringe that fluttered during a marriage, the tassel trimmed short after someone was lost. Because the carpet didn't just record what happened, it absorbed it. The laughter, the footsteps, the arguments that never quite finished, the way someone paced during a long winter, the wine spilled during a celebration, the ash that drifted down during a fire no one saw coming. And here's the truth, the empire never wrote down. Carpets were never about taxes. They were about in a continuity. In a world that changed, rugs remained. They were unrolled in times of joy. They were folded in grief. They were lifted from shelves during audits. They were laid on tombs at the end. And they remembered, even when the people forgot. You think now of the women, the quiet ones, the stubborn ones, the brilliant ones. They didn't leave scrolls or monuments or titles, but they left thread that lasted longer than laws, longer than borders, thread that could never be fully erased, because to unpick it would take longer than any bureaucrat was willing to sit still. And so the rugs remained, and with them, truth. Not in words, but in pattern, in repetition, in absence, in tension, in the slight shift of a flower petal that says, "We loved him more than we admitted." In the unfinished border that means, "She didn't come back." In the loop stitched tighter because that day, her hands were shaking. This was never just wool. It was witness. And now here you are, lying across 1,000 silent witnesses. Letting them hold you the way they held history, not forcefully, not coldly, but completely. And it's only now, here at the very end, that you realize the carpets didn't survive the empire. The empire survived through its carpets. They're what's left when the coins are gone, when the names fade, when the walls fall. They're the warmth under your feet, the softness beneath your grief, the rhythm in your breath. And as your eyelids grow heavier and your thoughts begin to soften, you think. You don't need to understand every symbol. You don't need to translate every loop. You just need to rest and let the carpet remember for you. So now, as your breathing slows and your body begins to soften into stillness, imagine the loom falling silent for the night, the dyes sealed in jars, the fire down to a whisper, the weavers asleep, curled beside the things they made. The empire isn't gone. It's just quieter now, stored in the patterns of rugs folded into corners, in the tassels hanging gently in the dark, in the corners of rooms where no one speaks anymore, but where the thread still listens. Let your thoughts unwind like yarn gently, easily, with no need to tie them back together. You don't need to remember everything tonight. The knots will hold. The wool will stay. There's a kind of trust in the thread, a softness that knows how to carry weight without showing strain. It holds the weight of memory, of mistakes, of effort, of love unspoken but never forgotten. Tonight, let that softness hold you. Not like a cradle, but like a story you don't have to tell again. You've traveled through time, through patterns, through hands and borders and fields and secrets. Now let your own story rest for a while. Let the carpet do the remembering. Let sleep do the weaving. Let silence finish the pattern. You're home now. You always were.